Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History Podcast. Tonight we step into a world where winter seems to linger a little too long, where spring arrives cautiously, and where entire communities watch the sky with a mixture of hope and suspicion. You stand on a muddy medieval road somewhere in Europe, your breath drifting into the cold air. The fields around you look quiet beneath a blanket of frost that should perhaps have disappeared weeks ago. The people passing by do not know they are living through the early stages of what future generations will call the Little Ice Age. They only know that the seasons feel strange, and if you happen to be carrying modern expectations about central heating, supermarkets, and weather forecasts, well, you probably will not survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. It is always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights. You walk forward along the village path, boots sinking slightly into damp earth. The year is somewhere within the late medieval period, and Europe is entering an era of cooler temperatures that will influence daily life for centuries. At first glance, nothing seems especially dramatic. That is the curious thing about major historical changes. They rarely announce themselves with trumpets. No one wakes up one morning and declares that a new climate period has begun. Instead, small observations accumulate. A farmer notices snow lingering on distant hills longer than it once did. A fisherman remarks that a familiar river freezes more often. An elderly woman sitting near a hearth recalls warmer summers from her childhood. These little comments drift through villages and towns like smoke from a chimney. You find yourself among people who have no concept of global climate systems. The idea of measuring temperatures across continents lies far in the future. Most people understand weather through direct experience. They watch clouds, they observe birds, they study winds and changing seasons. Nature itself serves as the calendar. One widely accepted historical reality is that parts of Europe experience cooler average temperatures between roughly the 14th and 19th centuries. The cooling varied from region to region, but many communities face shorter growing seasons and harsher winters than those of earlier medieval centuries. Of course, the villagers around you do not see centuries, they see next week's weather. That practical perspective shapes daily life. You pass a field where several farmers work despite the chill. Their clothing consists of layered wool garments that feel rough against the skin but provide valuable insulation. Wool is everywhere. In many ways, it serves as medieval Europe's first line of defense against an increasingly unpredictable climate. The air smells of damp soil and wood smoke nearby. A flock of geese moves noisily across a muddy enclosure. Children run between cottages, their cheeks pink from the cold. Life continues. Yet beneath this normal appearance lies a growing concern. Agriculture depends on reliable seasons. When those seasons begin changing, uncertainty spreads. Imagine relying entirely on local harvests for survival. No refrigerated trucks arrive from distant regions. No global supply chains compensate for poor weather. A disappointing harvest can affect an entire community. You continue walking toward the center of the village. Most buildings are modest structures with timber frames and thatched roofs. Smoke curls from openings above. The scent of burning wood hangs in the air so consistently that many people barely notice it anymore. Inside one cottage, a family gathers around a fire. The room appears dim by modern standards. Firelight dances across rough walls. Shadows move gently. The warmth feels welcome. A small detail often surprises modern observers. Many medieval homes housed both people and animals under the same roof or within connected structures. Livestock generated additional warmth during cold months. It was not always pleasant, but practicality often outweighed comfort. You might not love sharing your living space with a cow. The cow, however, may be helping you survive January. As evening approaches, conversations naturally turn toward weather. Weather occupies a central place in everyday thought. People discuss frost, rain, wind, cloud patterns, the condition of nearby streams. An unusual cold spell can become the dominant topic for weeks. One curious historical tidbit involves church bells. In some communities, bells were rung during storms because people believed the sound could help drive away destructive weather or evil forces associated with it. Whether the bells actually changed anything is another matter entirely, but the practice reflected a deep desire to influence an unpredictable world. As darkness settles, the village grows quieter. The distant barking of dogs echoes through the cold air. Wood crackles inside cottages. The sky above appears extraordinarily clear. Without modern light pollution, stars stretch across the heavens in breathtaking numbers. You tilt your head upward. The night feels enormous. People living through this era spend far more time observing nature than most modern individuals ever do. Their survival depends upon it. Tiny environmental changes carry real consequences. A subtle shift in seasonal patterns can mean reduced grain production. Reduced grain production can mean higher prices. Higher prices can mean hunger. The chain is brutally simple. Researchers continue to discuss the precise causes behind the Little Ice Age. Some point toward volcanic activity. Others emphasize variations in solar activity. Additional theories involve complex interactions between oceans, atmosphere, and land use. The exact balance of factors remains an active area of study. The villagers know none of this. They seek explanations through the frameworks available to them. Some interpret unusual weather as divine messages. Others blame local sins. Some simply accept nature's unpredictability. And many do what humans have always done. They adapt. You notice evidence of adaptation everywhere. Extra stores of firewood, thicker clothing, careful management of food supplies, practical knowledge passed between generations. The people around you may lack modern scientific language, but they possess experience. They understand hardship. They know how to prepare for cold seasons because previous winters have taught difficult lessons. That knowledge becomes increasingly valuable. The following decades will bring colder summers, severe winters, crop failures in some regions, and countless adjustments to everyday life. Yet these challenges unfold gradually. Tonight, however, none of that future history is visible. You simply stand within a medieval village as evening deepens. Smoke drifts into the dark sky. A distant church bell rings softly. Families gather around hearths. The chill in the air feels ordinary enough. Still, if you listen carefully, you can almost sense the beginning of a long climatic story that will shape generations yet unborn. And as the firelight flickers against cottage walls, people settle in for another cold night, unaware that tomorrow's concerns will start in the fields where harvests must somehow continue, despite a world growing just a little cooler than before. Morning arrives slowly. The cold that settled over the village during the night does not disappear when the sun rises. Instead, it lingers stubbornly across the fields, clinging to the earth as though reluctant to leave. You step outside a cottage and immediately notice frost sparkling on patches of grass. The air feels sharp enough to sting your nose. A rooster crows somewhere beyond the village. Smoke already rises from several chimneys. The farmers have work to do. They always have work to do. As you make your way toward the surrounding farmland, the importance of the harvest becomes impossible to ignore. Everything depends upon it. Every loaf of bread, every bowl of porridge, every stored sack of grain begins here among these fields. And during the Little Ice Age, these fields become increasingly difficult to predict. You walk beside a narrow strip of cultivated land where a farmer guides a simple plough through damp soil. His movements are practiced and efficient. The work is exhausting, but timing matters. Plant too early, and a late frost may destroy fragile crops. Plant too late, and the growing season may not provide enough warmth before autumn arrives. The margin for error is painfully small. One well-established historical reality is that cooler temperatures shortened growing seasons in many parts of Europe. Crops often had less time to mature fully before colder weather returned. For farming communities living close to subsistence levels, even modest reductions in yield could create serious difficulties. You kneel and pick up a handful of soil. It feels cold and heavy. The farmers around you understand this soil intimately. They know which sections drain poorly after rain. They know which corners of a field remain frost-prone. They know where crops tend to flourish and where they struggle. Their knowledge has accumulated through generations. Yet now, nature seems to be changing some of the rules. An older farmer pauses beside you. He gazes toward distant hills partly hidden beneath low clouds. His father, he says, remembered warmer years. His grandfather supposedly spoke of vineyards growing farther north than they do now. Whether every detail of those memories is accurate hardly matters. The perception itself is significant. People are beginning to sense that conditions are different from what previous generations experienced. The wind picks up. You pull your cloak tighter. Throughout medieval Europe, grain serves as the foundation of daily nutrition. Wheat is prized where conditions allow it. Rye, barley, and oats provide alternatives in colder or poorer regions. When harvests fail, communities often shift toward whatever crops prove most resilient. You notice several farmers discussing oats. That conversation is not accidental. Oats tolerate cooler conditions better than some other grains. As temperatures fluctuate, communities increasingly rely upon hardy crops capable of surviving uncertain weather. Adaptation becomes part of everyday life, not dramatic adaptation, not revolutionary adaptation, just thousands of practical adjustments made by ordinary people. A family experiments with different planting dates. A village expands storage facilities. A landlord encourages alternative crops. A monastery records unusual weather patterns. Small responses accumulate over time. A fascinating, lesser-known detail from the era involves vineyards. In some regions, records kept by monks tracked grape harvest dates with remarkable consistency. Modern researchers sometimes use these records to help reconstruct past climate conditions. A delayed grape harvest often reflects cooler growing seasons. The monks certainly were not trying to help future climate scientists. They simply cared about making wine. History works in amusing ways sometimes. As midday approaches, clouds begin gathering overhead. The light turns grey. Several women cross the fields carrying baskets of seed. Children help chase birds away from newly planted areas. Everyone contributes. Agricultural life demands cooperation. You hear the rhythmic sound of wooden tools striking earth, the smell of damp vegetation drift through the air. A horse snorts nearby. Everything feels grounded in the physical realities of land and weather. Modern people often complain when a forecast predicts rain during a weekend picnic. Here, weather possesses a much greater authority. Rain can nourish crops. Too much rain can rot them. Cold can preserve certain foods. Too much cold can destroy entire harvests. Every season carries opportunity and risk in equal measure. A question continues to occupy scholars today. Some researchers debate how much of the agricultural hardship associated with the Little Ice Age resulted directly from climate changes versus economic and political pressures already affecting medieval society. Weather clearly mattered, but human systems played important roles as well. The people around you do not separate these factors so neatly. Bad weather and bad fortune often feel like the same thing. By afternoon, a light drizzle begins falling. No one stops working immediately. Medieval farmers are far too familiar with unpleasant conditions. The rain darkens clothing and turns pathways muddy. Still, work continues. You pass a field where rye grows in neat rows. The crop appears healthy enough for now, yet beneath the surface lies uncertainty. Nobody can guarantee what the next few months will bring. An unexpected frost, excessive rain, a cool summer, a violent storm. Any of these could alter the outcome. This constant uncertainty shapes the emotional landscape of rural life. Patience becomes essential. So does resilience. You notice that people rarely assume good fortune. They hope for successful harvests, certainly, but they also prepare for disappointment. Experience has taught caution. As evening approaches, workers gradually leave the fields. The village begins drawing inward. Tools are stored, animals are gathered, gates are checked. The day's labour gives way to quieter activities. You walk alongside a narrow stream flowing between fields. The water reflects a pale sky. Nearby, several ducks glide across the surface. The scene feels peaceful, and yet every peaceful scene during the Little Ice Age contains an invisible calculation. Will the harvest be enough? Will winter arrive early? Will the grain stores last? Such questions accompany daily life almost constantly. The first stars begin appearing overhead. You return toward the village centre. Families gather for evening meals consisting largely of bread, porridge, vegetables, and whatever additional foods happen to be available. Diets vary by region and social status, but grain remains central. Inside one cottage, a father examines stored seed intended for next year's planting. He handles it carefully. Those seeds represent future survival. A poor decision today may create hardship months later. The responsibility feels heavy. Outside, the temperature begins falling once again. The cycle continues. Another day spent watching the sky. Another day spent trusting uncertain seasons. Another day spent trying to coax life from the soil, despite a climate growing increasingly unpredictable. And as darkness settles across the fields beyond the village, the farmers can do little more than wait, hoping that the crops planted beneath the cooling skies will find enough warmth to grow before the next cold season inevitably returns. The waiting never truly ends. After days spent watching fields and skies, you gradually realize that another challenge defines life during the Little Ice Age, just as much as uncertain harvests. Winter. Not the romantic winter of holiday cards and glowing decorations. Not the version softened by modern insulation, electric lights, and central heating. This is a season that shapes every decision long before the first snowflake falls. You stand outside the village as autumn begins fading. The air carries a familiar sharpness now. Leaves tumble across the ground in restless spirals. Birds gather in noisy flocks before departing for warmer regions. Around you, preparations are underway. Every family understands what is coming. The question is never whether winter will arrive. The question is how severe it will be. You walk beside several villagers hauling bundles of firewood toward their homes. The woodpile beside each cottage serves almost like a visible measure of confidence. A large stack offers reassurance. A small one inspires worry. The smell of freshly cut timber fills the air. Axes strike wood in steady rhythms. Children drag fallen branches from nearby woodland. Everyone contributes because warmth requires fuel. Fuel requires labour, and labour never seems to end. A commonly recognised historical fact is that firewood represented one of the most important resources in medieval Europe. During colder centuries associated with the Little Ice Age, access to sufficient fuel became even more critical. Entire communities devoted enormous effort to gathering, storing, and managing wood supplies. The task sounds simple enough, until you imagine surviving 5 months of freezing weather with only what you managed to collect beforehand. Suddenly every log feels precious. You pass an elderly woman carefully stacking split wood beneath a shelter. She arranges each piece with remarkable attention. Nothing is wasted. Rotten wood burns poorly. Wet wood produces excess smoke. Poor planning can leave a household cold when temperatures drop. Such details matter enormously. The village itself appears busy but calm. People have performed these preparations countless times before. Still, there is an undercurrent of concern. Longer winters mean greater consumption of resources. Greater consumption means increased pressure on already limited supplies. The equation is not complicated. One family stores extra wood. Another family repairs gaps in a roof. Someone reinforces a door against wind. Someone else patches worn clothing. Winter preparation touches every aspect of life. You follow a narrow path toward a small woodland at the edge of the settlement. The trees stand silent beneath a grey sky. Many medieval communities depended heavily upon nearby forests. Forests supplied fuel, building materials, animal forage, wild foods, medicinal plants. In some regions, disputes over woodland rights became increasingly important as demand for resources grew. A curious historical detail involves certain villages where people gathered and stored dried animal dung for use as supplementary fuel when wood became scarce. It may not sound glamorous, but survival rarely concerns itself with glamour. You can almost hear a medieval villager saying, "Warmth is warmth." And honestly, they would have a point. The afternoon grows colder, clouds drift overhead. The landscape seems to be slowly withdrawing into itself. Soon snow will cover many of these fields. Soon travel will become more difficult. Soon daylight will vanish earlier each afternoon. The psychological effect of winter deserves attention too. Modern people often underestimate the importance of light. During medieval winters, darkness arrives early and stays late. Candles are valuable. Oil lamps consume precious fuel. Most activities naturally contract around available daylight. Life becomes smaller, more concentrated, more inward. You enter a cottage where several family members sit together mending clothing. The room smells faintly of wool, smoke, and stew. Hands move steadily through familiar tasks. Needles repair worn sleeves. Boots receive new stitching. A cloak gains an extra layer of fabric. Winter clothing often determines comfort and survival alike. You notice that garments are rarely discarded casually. Everything is repaired, reused, altered, passed down. The concept of seasonal fashion trends would seem astonishing here. Warmth takes priority over appearance, though people certainly care about appearance when circumstances allow. Outside, the wind rattles loose branches. A dog curls beside a doorway. The atmosphere feels increasingly subdued. Seasonal rhythms shape emotional life in subtle ways. People spend more time indoors. Families gather more frequently around shared fires. Stories become especially important. Songs, folk tales, religious readings, conversation itself serves as a form of comfort. You begin to understand why storytelling traditions flourished so strongly in pre-modern societies. Long winter evenings create natural audiences. Some historians continue to debate the extent to which colder climate conditions directly influence social and cultural developments during the Little Ice Age. Separating environmental effects from broader historical changes remains challenging. Yet few would deny that weather affected daily experiences in profound ways. Night approaches. The temperature drops rapidly. Frost begins forming along fences and rooftops. The village grows quieter. Smoke rises straight upward through still air. You step inside another cottage just as darkness settles completely. The interior glows with firelight. A pot hangs above the flames. Several children sit listening as an older man tells stories from decades earlier. He recalls winters when snow buried roads. He remembers rivers freezing solid. He speaks of travellers trapped by storms. Whether every memory is perfectly accurate hardly matters. The stories carry lessons. Respect winter. Prepare early. Do not waste resources. Trust experience. Such wisdom passes between generations long before formal education reaches most people. The fire crackles softly. Outside, cold air presses against timber walls. You can hear occasional gusts moving through the village. The contrast between warmth and cold feels dramatic. It also feels fragile. One extinguished fire, one damaged roof, one depleted woodpile. Any of these could transform comfort into hardship. That awareness never entirely disappears. As the weeks progress, winter finally arrives in earnest. Snow blankets the landscape. Paths narrow. Fields vanish beneath white drifts. The familiar world changes shape. Sounds become muted. Distances seem greater. Movement becomes slower. You step outside one morning and find the village transformed. Breath hangs visibly before every face. Footprints mark fresh snow. The cold settles into your clothing almost immediately. Yet life continues. Animals still require feeding. Water still requires carrying. Meals still require preparing. Winter changes routines but does not eliminate responsibilities. In some ways, it increases them, and so you find yourself moving carefully through a frozen medieval landscape, surrounded by people who have learned through necessity that survival depends not upon defeating winter, but upon enduring it patiently, day after day, until the first distant signs of spring eventually return. The waiting never truly ends. After days spent watching fields and skies, you gradually realize that another challenge defines life during the Little Ice Age just as much as uncertain harvests. Winter, not the romantic winter of holiday cards and glowing decorations, not the version softened by modern insulation, electric lights, and central heating. This is a season that shapes every decision long before the first snowflake falls. You stand outside the village as autumn begins fading. The air carries a familiar sharpness now. Leaves tumble across the ground in restless spirals. Birds gather in noisy flocks before departing for warmer regions. Around you, preparations are underway. Every family understands what is coming. The question is never whether winter will arrive. The question is how severe it will be. You walk beside several villagers hauling bundles of firewood toward their homes. The woodpile beside each cottage serves almost like a visible measure of confidence. A large stack offers reassurance. A small one inspires worry. The smell of freshly cut timber fills the air. Axes strike wood in steady rhythms. Children drag fallen branches from nearby woodland. Everyone contributes because warmth requires fuel. Fuel requires labour, and labour never seems to end. A commonly recognised historical fact is that firewood represented one of the most important resources in medieval Europe. During colder centuries associated with the Little Ice Age, access to sufficient fuel became even more critical. Entire communities devoted enormous effort to gathering, storing, and managing wood supplies. The task sounds simple enough, until you imagine surviving 5 months of freezing weather with only what you managed to collect beforehand. Suddenly every log feels precious. You pass an elderly woman carefully stacking split wood beneath a shelter. She arranges each piece with remarkable attention. Nothing is wasted. Rotten wood burns poorly. Wet wood produces excess smoke. Poor planning can leave a household cold when temperatures drop. Such details matter enormously. The village itself appears busy but calm. People have performed these preparations countless times before. Still, there is an undercurrent of concern. Longer winters mean greater consumption of resources. Greater consumption means increased pressure on already limited supplies. The equation is not complicated. One family stores extra wood. Another family repairs gaps in a roof. Someone reinforces a door against wind. Someone else patches worn clothing. Winter preparation touches every aspect of life. You follow a narrow path toward a small woodland at the edge of the settlement. The trees stand silent beneath a grey sky. Many medieval communities depended heavily upon nearby forests. Forests supplied fuel, building material, animal forage, wild foods, medicinal plants. In some regions, disputes over woodland rights became increasingly important as demand for resources grew. A curious historical detail involves certain villages where people gathered and stored dried animal dung for use as supplementary fuel when wood became scarce. It may not sound glamorous, but survival rarely concerns itself with glamour. You can almost hear a medieval villager saying, "Warmth is warmth." And honestly, they would have a point. The afternoon grows colder. Clouds drift overhead. The landscape seems to be slowly withdrawing into itself. Soon snow will cover many of these fields. Soon travel will become more difficult. Soon daylight will vanish earlier each afternoon. The psychological effect of winter deserves attention too. Modern people often underestimate the importance of light. During medieval winters, darkness arrives early and stays late. Candles are valuable. Oil lamps consume precious fuel. Most activities naturally contract around available daylight. Life becomes smaller, more concentrated, more inward. You enter a cottage where several family members sit together mending clothing. The room smells faintly of wool, smoke, and stew. Hands move steadily through familiar tasks. Needles repair worn sleeves. Boots receive new stitching. A cloak gains an extra layer of fabric. Winter clothing often determines comfort and survival alike. You notice that garments are rarely discarded casually. Everything is repaired, reused, altered, passed down. The concept of seasonal fashion trends would seem astonishing here. Warmth takes priority over appearance, though people certainly care about appearance when circumstances allow. Outside, the wind rattles loose branches. A dog curls beside a doorway. The atmosphere feels increasingly subdued. Seasonal rhythms shape emotional life in subtle ways. People spend more time indoors. Families gather more frequently around shared fires. Stories become especially important. Songs, folk tales, religious readings, as conversation itself serves as a form of comfort. You begin to understand why storytelling traditions flourish so strongly in pre-modern societies. Long winter evenings create natural audiences. Some historians continue to debate the extent to which colder climate conditions directly influence social and cultural developments during the Little Ice Age. Separating environmental effects from broader historical changes remains challenging. Yet few would deny that weather affected daily experiences in profound ways. Night approaches. The temperature drops rapidly. Frost begins forming along fences and rooftops. The village grows quieter. Smoke rises straight upward through still air. You step inside another cottage just as darkness settles completely. The interior glows with firelight. A pot hangs above the flames. Several children sit listening as an older man tells stories from decades earlier. He recalls winters when snow buried roads. He remembers rivers freezing solid. He speaks of travellers trapped by storms. Whether every memory is perfectly accurate hardly matters. The stories carry lessons. Respect winter. Prepare early. Do not waste resources. Trust experience. Such wisdom passes between generations long before formal education reaches most people. The fire crackles softly. Outside, cold air presses against timber walls. You can hear occasional gusts moving through the village. The contrast between warmth and cold feels dramatic. It also feels fragile. One extinguished fire, one damaged roof, one depleted woodpile. Any of these could transform comfort into hardship. That awareness never entirely disappears. As the weeks progress, winter finally arrives in earnest. Snow blankets the landscape. Paths narrow. Fields vanish beneath white drifts. The familiar world changes shape. Sounds become muted. Distances seem greater. Movement becomes slower. You step outside one morning and find the village transformed. Breath hangs visibly before every face. Footprints mark fresh snow. The cold settles into your clothing almost immediately, yet life continues. Animals still require feeding. Water still requires carrying. Meals still require preparing. Winter changes routines but does not eliminate responsibilities. In some ways, it increases them. And so you find yourself moving carefully through a frozen medieval landscape, surrounded by people who have learned through necessity that survival depends not upon defeating winter, but upon enduring it patiently, day after day, until the first distant signs of spring eventually return. Morning arrives beneath a pale sky. The fire in the cottage has burned low during the night, and the room feels noticeably colder when you wake. Frost traces delicate patterns along the edges of the small window opening. Outside, snow still blankets the village, though the season has advanced enough that people are already thinking about something nearly as important as warmth. Food. Not today's meal. Not tomorrow's meal. The food that must last until the next successful harvest. You step outside and watch villagers beginning their daily routines. Some carry buckets, others check livestock. A few head towards storage buildings where precious supplies remain protected from weather, animals, and theft. Every sack of grain represents security. Every preserved vegetable represents another day survived. Every mistake made during storage carries consequences. The cold air bites at your face as you follow a narrow path toward a granary standing near the edge of the settlement. The structure appears simple enough, yet inside lies one of the village's greatest treasures: food reserves. In a world without refrigeration, preserving food requires skill, planning, and constant vigilance. Medieval communities developed numerous methods to extend the life of their harvests. Grain could remain usable for long periods if kept dry. Meat might be salted or smoked. Vegetables could be stored in cool conditions. Every successful technique increased the chances of surviving difficult months. You step inside. The smell is distinctive. Dry grain, wood, dust, a scent of stored survival. Several workers inspect sacks carefully. Moisture is the enemy. Rodents are the enemy. Mold is the enemy. In many ways, preserving food becomes its own battle, one fought quietly and continuously. A practical truth shapes every decision here. The harvest is only the beginning. Keeping food edible until spring is an equally important challenge. You watch a farmer run grain through his fingers. He examines it closely, searching for signs of spoilage. His expression remains serious. People understand exactly what is at stake. During favourable years, storage rooms bring comfort. During poor years, they become objects of intense concern. The memory of previous shortages never entirely disappears. You leave the granary and follow a woman carrying vegetables toward a cellar partially dug into the earth. The temperature inside remains cool and relatively stable. Root vegetables rest in neat piles. Turnips, carrots, parsnips. Foods that may not inspire modern culinary excitement, but provide valuable nutrition when fresh produce becomes scarce. The cellar feels almost peaceful, quiet, dark, protective. An overlooked historical detail involves the fact that some communities stored apples wrapped individually in straw to help preserve them through winter. The process required time and effort, but a fresh apple months after harvest could feel like a remarkable luxury. Imagine biting into fruit after a long season dominated by grain and preserved foods. Suddenly that apple becomes something special. Outside, clouds drift slowly across the sky. The village continues its work. Food management influences nearly every household decision. How much grain can be consumed now? How much must be reserved? Should extra livestock be slaughtered before winter? Feed runs short, can supplies stretch until spring? These calculations occur constantly, not in formal meetings, not on spreadsheets, simply through daily judgment and experience. You begin noticing signs of caution everywhere. People rarely waste food. Bread crusts are saved. Broths are reused. Ingredients appear repeatedly in different forms. The concept of throwing away edible food would seem absurd to many villagers. Hardship has taught valuable lessons. A frequently cited reality from medieval life is that harvest failures could trigger sharp increases in food prices. When grain became scarce, ordinary families often faced difficult choices about consumption and survival. Food insecurity remained a recurring feature of life across many regions. The consequences extend beyond hunger itself. Poor nutrition weakens people. Weakened people become more vulnerable to illness. Productivity declines. Communities become more fragile. Everything connects. You visit a cottage where a family shares a simple midday meal. The portions are modest. Nobody complains. Modesty is expected. A thick porridge steams gently in wooden bowls. The smell is earthy and comforting. Children eat quietly. Adults discuss remaining supplies. The conversation sounds practical rather than fearful. Preparation provides a certain peace of mind. Yet anxiety remains present beneath the surface. What if spring arrives late? What if next summer proves unusually cold? What if crops fail again? Such possibilities are never far away. Experts still examine how often climate-related shortages directly caused famine versus merely increasing pressure on already vulnerable populations. The relationship between weather, agriculture, economics, and politics remains complex. Nevertheless, cooler conditions clearly added challenges for many communities. The afternoon passes. Snow begins falling lightly once again. Tiny flakes drift through the air. You watch villagers moving steadily between homes and storage areas. The rhythm feels familiar. Store, preserve, protect, repeat. Survival. During the Little Ice Age depends upon this rhythm. As evening approaches, you accompany a family checking food reserves beneath their home. A candle illuminates shelves lined with preserved goods. The quantity is respectable. Not abundant, not alarming. Enough, perhaps. That word appears frequently in medieval life. Enough. Enough wood. Enough grain. Enough livestock. Enough luck. Rarely abundance. Mostly enough. And sometimes not even that. The candlelight flickers against rough walls. You realize how much faith people place in these stored supplies. Months of labor are concentrated here in a tangible form. The harvest carried from field to storage, the vegetables gathered before frost, the meat preserved carefully, the grain protected from moisture. Every item represents effort accumulated over time. Outside, darkness settles across the village. Snow continues falling softly. Inside homes, families eat evening meals and discuss plans for the coming weeks. Life feels quiet. Yet beneath that quiet lies constant calculation. The food stores determine possibilities. They shape confidence. They shape fear. They shape the future. You sit beside a hearth and listen to the wind moving beyond the walls. Nearby, a family shares bread made from grain harvested months earlier. The connection between past labour and present survival feels immediate. Nothing is taken for granted. Every meal serves as proof that preparation worked, at least for now, and as the fire glows warmly against the growing darkness, the villagers can only hope that the carefully guarded food beneath their roofs will last long enough to carry them through another winter in a world where cold seasons seem increasingly determined to test the limits of human endurance. The snow finally begins to ease, not disappear, not melt, simply ease. For the first time in days, the sky opens enough to reveal pale sunlight filtering across the frozen countryside. The light glitters on icy fields and frozen hedgerows. From a distance, the landscape looks beautiful. Up close, it remains challenging. You leave the village shortly after dawn and follow a road that has nearly vanished beneath packed snow. What was once a muddy track bordered by grass is now a narrow corridor marked only by footprints, wagon ruts, and memory. Travel during the Little Ice Age is rarely simple. In winter, it can become an adventure nobody particularly wants. The cold air feels dry and sharp. Your breath rises in pale clouds. Somewhere in the distance, the creaking sound of a wagon reaches your ears long before the vehicle itself becomes visible. When it finally appears, progress is slow, painfully slow. The wheels struggle against frozen ground and uneven surfaces hidden beneath snow. The driver looks tired. The horse looks unimpressed. Neither seems surprised by the difficulty. This is simply life. A documented reality of medieval transportation is that most roads remained rough and poorly maintained by modern standards. Seasonal weather heavily influenced movement of people and goods. During particularly cold periods, snow, ice, and mud often disrupted travel for weeks at a time. You watch the wagon continue forward inch by inch. Nobody expects speed. Reliability matters more. The challenge extends far beyond personal inconvenience. When roads become difficult, trade slows, messages arrive late, supplies become harder to move, communities feel more isolated, a harsh winter can shrink the world considerably. You continue along the road and soon reach a small river, or rather, what appears to be a river. Much of its surface is frozen. The water beneath still flows in places, but thick ice dominates the scene. The silence feels remarkable. Only occasional cracking sounds interrupt the stillness. Frozen rivers become one of the most striking features associated with colder centuries. In some regions, waterways that rarely froze during warmer periods began freezing more regularly. Such changes influenced transportation, commerce, and daily routines. You step cautiously onto the ice near the bank. The surface groans faintly. That is enough encouragement for you to step back immediately. Medieval people developed a healthy respect for frozen water. Many learned through experience which crossings were safe and which were not. Still, accidents happened. Nature remained unpredictable. An intriguing historical anecdote comes from later centuries of the Little Ice Age, when some frozen rivers in Europe occasionally hosted temporary markets, gatherings, and even entertainment on the ice itself. Entire communities adapted creatively to conditions that would have seemed unusual during warmer periods. Humans have a remarkable talent for turning challenges into opportunities, or at least into excuses for social events. The road continues beyond the river. You encounter several travellers wrapped in thick wool cloaks. Their clothing is layered carefully against the cold. Faces are partially hidden. Conversations are brief because opening your mouth too much invites freezing air inside. Nobody seems eager to linger outdoors. Travellers move with purpose. You join a small group heading toward a nearby town. The pace remains slow. Snow crunches beneath boots. Wind moves across open fields. The smell of smoke occasionally drifts from distant farmhouses. Hours pass. The countryside feels larger during winter. Distances seem longer. Every journey demands more effort. You begin noticing another challenge. Daylight. Winter days are short. Very short. The sun climbs reluctantly and begins descending almost as soon as it appears. Travellers must plan carefully. Being caught far from shelter after dark carries risks. Roads become harder to follow. Temperatures drop. Navigation becomes more difficult. A merchant walking beside you glances repeatedly toward the sky, not because he enjoys cloud formations, because daylight is a resource, one that disappears quickly. Researchers continue exploring how climatic shifts influence regional trade networks during colder centuries, while economic systems adapted in many ways. Severe winters and disrupted transportation clearly affected movement across certain areas. The group eventually reaches a small bridge spanning a narrow stream. Ice hangs beneath the structure like crystal teeth. The scene feels almost magical. Then a freezing gust of wind sweeps across the bridge and instantly reminds everyone that magic can be uncomfortable. Cloaks tighten, heads lower, the journey continues. By late afternoon, the town comes into view. Stone walls rise from the snowy landscape. Smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys. The sight inspires visible relief among the travellers. Shelter means warmth. Warmth means rest. The connection is wonderfully simple. As you approach the gate, you notice sledges carrying goods across snow-covered routes. In some regions, winter conditions occasionally made certain forms of transport easier rather than harder. Frozen ground reduced mud. Snow created smooth surfaces for sledges. Not every consequence of colder weather was entirely negative. Adaptation often revealed unexpected advantages. Inside the town, streets remain crowded despite the season. People still work, trade continues, life persists. Yet winter leaves its mark everywhere. Snow piled against walls, ice gathered beneath eaves, bundles of firewood stacked near every doorway. The climate influences every detail. Evening approaches. The streets gradually empty. Travellers seek lodging. Merchants secure goods. Residents hurry home before temperatures fall further. You find yourself standing near the town gate as darkness settles across the frozen landscape beyond. The road you followed this morning is already becoming difficult to see. Snow begins falling once more. Softly at first, then steadily. The countryside slowly disappears beneath a curtain of white. You think about the villages scattered across that darkness, the isolated farmhouses, the travellers still walking, the wagons moving slowly through the cold. Distance feels different during the Little Ice Age. The environment itself creates barriers. Every journey requires patience, preparation, endurance, and sometimes little luck. The snow continues drifting downward as the town lights flicker warmly behind you. Beyond the walls, roads, rivers, and frozen fields stretch into the night, linking communities together while simultaneously reminding everyone how fragile those connections can become when winter decides to tighten its grip upon the world. The town fades behind you as dawn arrives beneath a sky the colour of old parchment. The snowstorm that followed your journey has passed during the night. Fresh snow covers rooftops, walls, and roads in an untouched white blanket. The world appears quieter than before, as though winter itself has lowered its voice. You travel toward a place that often stands at the centre of medieval life during difficult times. A monastery. Its stone buildings rise from the snowy landscape ahead, sturdy and weathered. Unlike many village cottages, these structures appear built with permanence in mind. Thick walls resist wind, narrow windows limit heat loss, bells hang above the complex, silent for now. As you approach, you hear only faint sounds, footsteps in snow, the distant caw of a raven, the soft rustle of robes moving through cold air. The atmosphere feels calm, almost timeless. Monasteries played important roles throughout medieval Europe. Beyond their religious functions, many served as centres of learning, record-keeping, agriculture, hospitality, and charity. During periods of environmental hardship, these institutions often became important sources of stability within local communities. A monk greets several travellers arriving at the gate. No elaborate ceremony follows, just practical hospitality, shelter from the cold, a place near a fire, perhaps a simple meal. In winter, such gestures carry enormous value. You enter the monastery grounds. The smell of wood smoke drifts between stone buildings. Snow crunches beneath your boots. The architecture feels different from the villages you have visited. Simplicity dominates the design, function over luxury, durability over comfort. Yet compared to many peasant homes, the monastery offers advantages. The thick stone walls help moderate temperature changes, storage facilities hold food supplies, workshops support daily operations, knowledge accumulates here alongside resources. Inside one building, several monks copy texts by candlelight. The room feels cold despite a nearby fire. Ink freezes more easily than modern office workers might appreciate. Hands move carefully across parchment. The scratching sound of quills creates a steady rhythm. These men preserve knowledge while the world outside battles snow and frost. One fascinating detail survives from medieval records. Monastic communities often documented weather events with surprising care. Unusually cold winters, severe storms, failed harvests, and frozen rivers sometimes appeared in chronicles maintained by religious houses. Without realizing it, these observers left valuable evidence for future historians studying climate patterns. Sometimes history survives because somebody simply kept notes. The thought feels oddly comforting. You move into another part of the complex where food preparation is underway. Large pots simmer above fires. The aroma is rich compared to the sparse scents of many village kitchens. Not extravagant, just substantial. Monasteries often possessed greater organizational resources than individual households. That advantage could prove significant during difficult years. You watch workers distribute bread to several poor villagers who have arrived seeking assistance. Nobody appears surprised by the arrangement. Such charity forms part of the institution's purpose. Winter tends to increase demand. When crops fail or supplies diminish, vulnerable people often turn toward places capable of offering help. The cold outside remains relentless. Inside, there is at least some protection. As the day progresses, you accompany a monk through storage rooms filled with grain, preserved foods, and supplies. The scale impresses you, not because abundance is everywhere, because planning is everywhere. Preparation, organization, discipline. The same qualities that support religious life also support survival. You notice shelves lined with carefully stored goods, records documenting inventories, systems designed to minimize waste. Nothing seems accidental. A point frequently highlighted by historians is that monasteries often manage substantial agricultural lands. Their economic activities could be extensive, allowing some communities to withstand environmental challenges more effectively than isolated households. That does not mean monasteries escaped hardship. Far from it. A cold summer affects monastery fields just as surely as a village fields. A failed harvest still hurts. The difference lies in scale and organisation. By midday, snow begins falling lightly once again. You cross an enclosed courtyard where footprints quickly disappear beneath fresh flakes. The silence feels profound. Even the world beyond the monastery wall seems distant. Several monks continue working outdoors despite the weather. Animals require care. Buildings require maintenance. Food production never fully stops. Winter changes routines. It does not eliminate responsibilities. Researchers continue examining the extent to which monastic records accurately reflect broader climate conditions across medieval Europe. Individual regions often experience different patterns, making interpretation complex. Nevertheless, these records remain among the most valuable windows into environmental history. The afternoon passes peacefully. You spend time in the monastery library, where shelves hold manuscripts copied over generations. The room smells faintly of parchment, wax, and aging wood. Outside, the temperature drops. Inside, knowledge accumulates quietly. The contrast feels striking. Beyond these walls, storms may rage, harvests may fail, roads may freeze. Yet here, people attempt to preserve continuity, memory, learning, order. As evening approaches, the bell finally rings. Its deep tone echoes across snowy fields and frozen roads. The sound travels farther than you might expect, across villages, across farmland, across a landscape shaped by cold. A curious local tradition catches your attention later that evening. In some regions, people believe certain saints offered protection against specific weather-related hardships. During severe winters, prayers connected to these figures sometimes became especially common. Whether such practices changed outcomes is impossible to know, but they certainly offered comfort, and comfort matters, particularly during long winters. Night settles across the monastery, candles flicker, voices lower. Snow gathers silently against stone walls. You stand near a narrow window and look out across the frozen countryside. Somewhere beyond the darkness lie countless villages facing the same challenges. Cold homes, limited food, uncertain seasons. Yet here, within these walls, there exists a small pocket of stability. Not perfect safety, not guaranteed security. Simply a place where preparation, faith, and community combine to push back against the hardships of a colder world. The bell's final echo fades into the night. Snow continues falling beyond the monastery grounds, covering roads and fields alike, while inside, fires glow softly and people prepare themselves for another winter evening, in an age when resilience often mattered as much as belief. The monastery bell fades behind you as you continue toward a larger town. Winter still dominates the landscape, but signs of movement appear everywhere. Wagons creak along snow-packed streets. Merchants hurry through marketplaces wrapped in layers of wool. Smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys, creating a hazy canopy above rooftops. Life goes on. It always does. Even when the climate becomes colder, even when harvests become uncertain, even when entire communities worry about the next season, the marketplace before you serves as proof. You step through a crowded square where vendors range goods on wooden stalls. Voices mingle with the sounds of animals, carts, and church bells. The atmosphere feels energetic despite the cold. At first glance, it looks like any thriving medieval market. Then you begin noticing the details. Prices, conversations, expressions. The subtle signs of a society adapting to environmental pressure. One of the clearest realities of medieval economic life is that food prices often fluctuated dramatically after poor harvests. When grain became scarce, the effects spread quickly through towns and cities. Bread cost more. Livestock feed became expensive. Families found their resources stretched thinner than before. The cold weather itself does not negotiate. The market simply reflects its consequences. You stop near a baker's stall where customers discuss recent prices. Nobody sounds happy. Nobody sounds shocked either. This is not the first difficult season they have experienced. People have learned that abundance and scarcity often arrive in cycles. Still, that knowledge does little to make expensive bread more affordable. The baker removes several fresh loaves from a nearby oven. The smell instantly cuts through the cold air. Warm bread possesses almost magical powers. For a brief moment, every person nearby seems slightly happier. Even you. Especially you. Because honestly, few things smell better than fresh bread on a freezing morning. You continue deeper into the market. Bundles of wool hang from one stall. Salted fish from distant regions appear at another. Firewood occupies an entire section of the square. Fuel has become valuable enough to command serious attention. Every winter reinforces its importance. You notice merchants discussing transportation delays. Snow blocked one route. Frozen waterways disrupted another. A shipment arrived late. A delivery never appeared at all. Trade networks continue functioning, but colder conditions introduce additional complications. Nothing stops entirely. Everything becomes harder. A lesser-known historical curiosity involves the fact that some medieval market regulations attempted to control the size and quality of bread during periods of scarcity. Authorities understood that public anger could grow quickly when food became expensive. Bakers occasionally faced inspections intended to prevent fraud or unfair practices. Imagine being the official responsible for measuring loaves of bread while everyone around you is already frustrated. That sounds like a difficult job description. The market grows busier as midday approaches. People from surrounding villages arrive carrying goods to exchange. Farmers bring produce. Craftsmen offer tools. Traders display items from farther away. The marketplace acts as a meeting point where local concerns and broader economic forces intersect. You overhear discussions about weather. Of course you do. Weather remains one of the most common topics in medieval Europe. A merchant complains about frozen roads. A farmer worries about spring planting. A traveller describes snowstorms in another region. The climate enters nearly every conversation eventually. Economic historians frequently note that local markets served as essential lifelines connecting rural and urban communities. During periods of environmental stress, these connections became even more important because they allowed resources to move between regions experiencing different conditions. Not perfectly, not instantly, but often enough to matter. You pause beside a trader selling imported goods. His inventory appears smaller than expected. He explains that transportation has become unpredictable. Some routes remain usable. Others become dangerous. The uncertainty affects profits. And uncertainty, as you're beginning to realize, becomes one of the defining features of life during the Little Ice Age. The afternoon sky darkens with approaching clouds. Snow threatens once more. Yet the market remains active. People cannot simply wait for perfect weather. Life demands action. Food must be purchased. Goods must be exchanged. Debts must be paid. Winter may complicate commerce, but it rarely stops it completely. Researchers continue examining how much climatic cooling influenced long-term economic developments across different regions of Europe. Some areas adapted effectively, while others struggled more severely. The outcomes varied considerably depending on geography, politics, resources, and local conditions. The complexity is enormous. The daily reality, however, feels simple. Can people obtain what they need? That question matters more than abstract theories. As afternoon gives way to evening, vendors begin packing away unsold goods. The square slowly transforms. Voices grow quieter. Carts depart. Customers disappear into winding streets. The smell of roasting food drifts from nearby taverns. A layer of fresh snow begins settling across rooftops. You enter a small tavern near the market. The warmth feels welcome after hours outdoors. Inside, conversations continue around wooden tables. Merchants compare prices, travellers exchange news, local residents discuss rumours. The marketplace may be closing, but the flow of information continues. That information holds value, sometimes almost as much value as goods themselves. A report of poor harvests elsewhere may influence decisions. News of blocked roads matters. Knowledge becomes a resource. The fire crackles nearby. Candles flicker against dark walls. You listen as people share stories about previous winters. Some accounts sound exaggerated. Perhaps they are. Every generation seems to remember one legendary winter that grows slightly worse each time it is retold. Human nature remains wonderfully consistent. Outside, snow continues falling. The market square grows quiet. Stalls stand empty beneath a fresh white covering. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance lies a web of economic relationships connecting villages, towns, monasteries, and distant regions. The Little Ice Age challenges those connections. Sometimes it strengthens them, sometimes it strains them, always it influences them. You finish the evening looking across the snow-covered marketplace from a tavern window. Tomorrow the merchants will return, the bakers will bake, the traders will bargain, the customers will compare prices, and all of them will continue navigating a colder world where every season leaves its mark not only on fields and harvests, but also on the bustling markets that keep medieval society alive. The market square lies quiet beneath fresh snow when morning arrives. Only a few footprints interrupt the white surface. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marks the beginning of another day. As merchants prepare stalls and craftsmen unlock workshops, your attention turns toward a group whose experience of the Little Ice Age often receives less attention. Children. You spot them almost immediately. A cluster of boys races across a narrow street, laughing despite the cold. Nearby, two girls carry buckets of water with expressions suggesting they would much rather be doing anything else. Childhood exists here. Play exists here. Joy exists here. Yet childhood in medieval Europe differs greatly from modern expectations, especially during colder centuries. The first thing you notice is responsibility. Children contribute to household survival from an early age. The exact tasks vary according to age, family circumstances, and location, but work forms a regular part of daily life. Helping with livestock, gathering fuel, carrying water, assisting in fields, and learning practical skills are common experiences. The cold does not excuse anyone from these duties. If anything, winter creates additional work. You follow a young boy carrying a bundle of firewood nearly half his size. He moves carefully across an icy path. Nobody treats the task as unusual, because it is not. Every piece of wood matters. Every helping hand matters. The family depends upon collective effort. Yet responsibility does not erase childhood entirely. Far from it. A few minutes later, you watch the same boy throw a snowball at a friend. The accuracy is impressive. The retaliation is immediate. Some aspects of human behaviour appear wonderfully timeless. You continue walking through the town. Children seem everywhere, helping parents, running errands, learning trades, chasing one another through snowy streets. Their lives unfold within the same climatic challenges affecting adults. The difference lies in perspective. For many children, the Little Ice Age is not an unusual historical period. It is simply normal life. The weather they grow up with becomes their standard. A noteworthy observation from surviving records is that many medieval children entered apprenticeships during adolescence, learning trades from experienced craftsmen. Such arrangements helped ensure practical skills passed between generations while providing families with economic opportunities. Education takes many forms here. Some lessons occur in workshops, others occur in kitchens, others take place in fields or barns. Life itself serves as the classroom. You pause near a frozen pond where several children slide cautiously across the ice. Their laughter echoes through the cold air. Parents watch from a distance with mixed expressions, part amusement, part concern. The combination has probably existed for thousands of years. One delightful historical curiosity comes from medieval manuscripts that occasionally include doodles and sketches in the margins. Among the religious texts and formal writings, you sometimes find playful drawings, humorous scenes, and evidence that even serious scribes possessed lighter sides. Such details remind us that medieval people enjoyed amusement just as much as anyone else. The children before you certainly do. They transform snow into games. They turn icy streets into adventures. They find entertainment despite limited resources, perhaps because limited resources encourage creativity. The afternoon grows colder. Clouds gather overhead. A group of younger children accompanies an older sibling collecting water. The task looks tedious. The bucket is heavy. The path is slippery. Still, it must be done. Daily necessities do not pause for weather. You notice that clothing often passes between siblings. Garments are repaired repeatedly. Boots receive new stitching whenever possible. Resources remain too valuable to waste. Growing children present a practical challenge. They have an unfortunate habit of outgrowing things. The medieval solution frequently involves reuse, lots of reuse. An older coat becomes a younger sibling's coat. Worn fabric becomes patches. Nothing disappears until every useful purpose has been exhausted. Researchers continue exploring how childhood experiences varied across medieval Europe according to region, wealth, and social status. Evidence suggests considerable diversity. Some children enjoyed greater security than others, while many faced demanding responsibilities from remarkably young ages. The weather influences all of them. As you walk through the town, you observe children helping drive livestock towards shelter. Others assist with food preparation. Some carry messages. Some gather kindling. The work appears ordinary because it is ordinary. Childhood includes labour, yet it also includes imagination. Inside one home, several children sit near a hearth listening to stories. The firelight dances across their faces. Outside, snow begins falling once again. Inside, heroes battle monsters. Saints perform miracles. Travellers cross distant lands. Stories offer warmth of a different kind. They expand horizons beyond immediate hardships. You remember the long winter evenings discussed earlier. Children experience those evenings too. The storytelling tradition helps bridge generations. Knowledge passes along with entertainment, warnings, lessons, local legends, family history. Everything blends together. As dusk approaches, the streets begin emptying. Families call children home. Doors close. Fires brighten. The town settles into evening rhythms. A small group of youngsters still plays in the snow despite the growing darkness. Their enthusiasm appears stronger than their judgment. This observation also feels timeless. Eventually, even they disappear indoors. You enter a cottage where several generations share a meal. The youngest child struggles to stay awake. The oldest grandparent smiles knowingly. The scene feels familiar despite the centuries separating it from modern life. Cold weather, family gathering, simple food, shared stories. Some experiences transcend historical periods. An ongoing discussion among historians concerns how much modern ideas about childhood differ from medieval realities. Evidence reveals both significant differences and surprising similarities. Medieval children often accepted responsibilities earlier, yet they also played, learned, imagined, and formed emotional bonds much like children today. The fire burns steadily. Outside, winter continues its slow work across fields and forests. Inside, children prepare for sleep beneath blankets and shared warmth. Tomorrow will bring chores, lessons, games, responsibilities, and perhaps another snowball battle or two. As the evening grows quieter, you realize that these children represent the future of communities adapting to a colder world. They are learning skills, habits, and expectations shaped by the Little Ice Age without ever knowing it has a name. To them, this climate is simply life itself, and they will carry its lessons into the generations still to come. The town grows quiet after sunset. Snow settles gently on rooftops and chimneys. The sounds of the day fade one by one until only the occasional bark of a dog or distant creak of a door disturbs the stillness. Dogs. That seems like an appropriate place to begin, because while people often receive most of the attention in historical accounts, they never faced the Little Ice Age alone. Animals stood beside them through every season, through every failed harvest, through every freezing winter, through every uncertain spring. As dawn arrives the next morning, you leave the town and travel toward nearby farms, where the relationship between humans and animals becomes impossible to miss. A horse exhales a cloud of steam into the cold air. Several chickens scratch at snow-covered ground in search of anything edible. A dog trots across the yard with the confidence of a creature that believes it owns the entire settlement. Perhaps it does, at least in its own mind. The connection between people and animals during medieval life was deeply practical. Livestock provided food, labour, transportation, clothing materials, and economic security. Losing animals during a harsh winter could be nearly as devastating as losing stored food supplies. In many households, animals represented wealth, not abstract wealth, living wealth, breathing wealth, occasionally stubborn wealth. You follow a farmer into a barn where cattle stand close together for warmth. The difference in temperature is immediately noticeable. The air feels warmer than outside, but also heavier and more humid. The animals shift quietly. Hooves scrape wood. Breath rises in pale clouds. The smell is unmistakable and powerful, earthy, very much alive. During winter, keeping livestock healthy becomes a constant concern. Animals require food, shelter, and protection from severe weather. Every bale of hay stored during summer now proves its value. You watch a farmer inspect feed supplies. His expression mirrors the careful calculations you observed earlier with grain storage. The same question appears again. Will it be enough? A fascinating detail from medieval rural life is that livestock were sometimes brought surprisingly close to human living spaces during severe weather. The arrangement helped protect valuable animals while also providing a small amount of additional warmth. Modern homeowners may not appreciate sharing space with a cow. Medieval farmers often viewed the matter differently. A living cow in winter was preferable to a dead cow in spring. Practicality usually wins such arguments. You spend part of the morning helping care for horses. Their importance becomes obvious immediately. Without horses, transportation slows dramatically. Fields become harder to work. Communication becomes more difficult. Trade suffers. The medieval world depends heavily upon animal power. A healthy horse can transform daily life. An injured horse can create serious problems. The Little Ice Age increases these challenges. Colder winters mean greater demands on feed supplies. Animals burn more energy staying warm. Severe storms can make grazing difficult. Extended cold spells place pressure on both livestock and owners. Nature sends the bill to everyone, not just humans. You leave the barn and walk toward a pasture bordered by snow-covered trees. Several sheep huddle together against the wind. Their thick wool provides remarkable protection. In fact, Wool becomes one of the most valuable resources in colder centuries. Clothing, blankets, trade goods. The humble sheep contributes far more than many people realize. As the afternoon progresses, you observe daily routines repeated across countless medieval communities. Feeding livestock, checking shelters, repairing fences, monitoring animal health. The tasks are repetitive but essential. No one can afford neglect. A single winter illness spreading through a herd may threaten an entire family's future. Some researchers continue discussing how changing climate conditions affected animal husbandry across different regions of Europe. Evidence suggests that communities adapted breeding practices, grazing strategies, and resource management in response to environmental pressures. Adaptation appears everywhere once you begin looking for it. People adapt, crops adapt, even livestock management adapts. The process unfolds gradually across generations. You notice a young shepherd guiding animals toward better shelter as clouds gather overhead. The sky darkens, snow seems likely. Again, winter never entirely relaxes its grip. The shepherd works calmly. Experience has taught him the importance of preparation. One memorable oddity preserved in medieval folklore involves animals behaving strangely before severe weather. Farmer often watched livestock carefully, believing unusual behavior might signal approaching storms. Whether the animals truly predicted weather or people simply noticed patterns after the fact remains difficult to determine. Still, you understand the appeal. When your survival depends upon environmental conditions, every possible clue becomes valuable, even clues involving moody sheep. By late afternoon, snow begins falling. Large flakes drift slowly across the countryside. The animals respond in different ways. Some seek shelter immediately. Others seem entirely unconcerned. The dog you noticed earlier appears delighted by the whole situation. Not everyone experiences winter equally. Inside a barn, you watch a family caring for a newborn calf. The scene feels surprisingly tender. Children bring water. Adults check bedding. Everyone hopes the animal survives. Its future matters. Its health matters. Its existence carries economic significance, certainly. But emotional connections develop as well. People spend enormous amounts of time with these animals. Relationships form naturally. Historical records often focus on economics and agriculture, yet everyday affection undoubtedly existed too. The boundary between practical necessity and personal attachment is rarely as clear as textbooks suggest. Evening arrives. The snowfall intensifies. Farm buildings glow softly beneath lantern light. Animals settle into shelters. People return indoors. The entire landscape seems to exhale. You stand near a stable and listen. Gentle movements, soft breathing, occasional sounds from the storm outside. The atmosphere feels peaceful. These creatures share the burdens of a colder world alongside their human caretakers. They pull wagons, provide food, supply wool, offer companionship, enable survival. And as another winter night closes across medieval Europe, humans and animals alike retreat from the cold, gathering within whatever shelter they can find, bound together by a simple truth that has existed for thousands of years. Neither could endure this world quite so well without the other. The storm weakens during the night. By morning, the farm lies beneath a smooth blanket of snow, interrupted only by footprints leading between barns, cottages, and storage buildings. The world feels still, almost too still. Because today you begin noticing another challenge that follows closely behind cold weather. Poor harvests and long winters, illness. You walk through a village where smoke rises steadily from chimneys. At first glance, everything appears normal. Children carry water. Farmers tend livestock. Women prepare meals. Life continues according to familiar rhythms, yet hidden within many homes are people who are not well, a persistent cough, a fever, weakness brought on by poor nutrition, an injury slow to heal. The Little Ice Age does not create disease by itself, but colder conditions often make survival harder for people already living close to the edge. You enter a modest cottage where a man rests near the hearth wrapped in blankets. His family moves quietly around him. The room smells of smoke, herbs, and warm broth. The atmosphere feels concerned but not panicked. Illness is a familiar visitor in medieval life. Far too familiar. A broadly accepted historical observation is that poor nutrition could weaken resistance to disease. During years when harvests failed or food became scarce, many communities faced increased vulnerability to sickness. The connection between nourishment and health existed long before people understood germs. They didn't know why certain conditions occurred. They simply noticed patterns. Hungry people often became weaker. Weaker people often became sicker. Experience taught what science would later explain. You sit beside the fire and listen to family members discuss remedies, herbal preparations, rest, warm drinks, prayers, advice passed down through generations. Medical knowledge in medieval Europe combined observation, tradition, religious belief, and classical learning inherited from earlier cultures. Some treatments helped, some did little, a few probably made matters worse. Human history contains many enthusiastic medical experiments. Not all of them were successful. Outside, you meet a village healer carrying a basket filled with dried plants. The contents release subtle scents into the cold air: mint, sage, various herbs gathered during warmer seasons and preserved carefully. The healer's knowledge comes from years of experience. People seek advice because alternatives are limited. Doctors exist, but many rural communities rely upon local expertise. You accompany the healer to another cottage. Along the way, she points out plants that become useful medicines during different times of year. Her understanding of the natural world is impressive. Practical knowledge accumulates slowly across generations. One unusual detail recorded in certain medieval remedies involved carrying particular plants or objects believed to offer protection against illness. Modern readers may smile at such practices, but they often existed alongside more practical treatments rather than replacing them entirely. People rarely divided medicine into neat categories. Belief and observation frequently travelled together. The afternoon grows colder. Wind sweeps across the village. You begin noticing how environmental conditions influence daily health. Homes remain smoky. Ventilation is limited. Winter encourages people to spend long periods indoors. Crowded living conditions become common. The combination creates challenges. Not every illness spreads because of climate. Yet climate shapes the circumstances in which people live. That influence matters. Some historians continue examining the extent to which climatic cooling contributed indirectly to disease patterns during certain periods. Establishing exact relationships remains difficult because so many factors interact simultaneously, including nutrition, sanitation, population movement, and economic conditions. The past rarely offers simple answers. Still, the connection between hardship and health feels visible around you. You stop near a frozen well where villagers gather water. The task itself requires effort. Buckets feel heavier in winter. Paths become slippery. Cold air stings exposed skin. Even ordinary activities demand more energy. Energy that must come from food. And food, as you have already seen, is not always abundant. Inside another home, an elderly woman sits close to the fire. Age has made winter more difficult. Her hands tremble slightly. Movement comes slower than before, yet she remains active, helping prepare vegetables for supper. The determination is remarkable. Life during the Little Ice Age rewards resilience, not because resilience eliminates hardship, because hardship is unavoidable. As evening approaches, snow begins falling lightly again. The village gradually withdraws indoors, doors close, shutters secure, fires brighten. You visit a small religious building where several people gather to pray for a sick neighbour. The scene reminds you that health is never viewed purely as a physical matter in medieval society. Spiritual concerns remain deeply intertwined with everyday life. People seek comfort where they can find it, and comfort itself possesses value, particularly during uncertain times. A curious surviving account from later centuries describes individuals carrying heated stones wrapped in cloth to warm beds before sleep. The practice may sound surprisingly modern. In many ways, it is. Cold nights encourage practical innovation regardless of historical period. Nobody enjoys climbing into an icy bed. Some problems transcend centuries. Darkness settles fully across the village. The wind quiets. Snowflakes drift gently through the night air. Inside homes, families care for relatives, share meals, exchange remedies, and hope for recovery where recovery is possible. You sit beside a hearth listening to the soft crackle of burning wood. The warmth feels reassuring. So does the presence of other people. Community often serves as one of the most important medicines available. A helping hand, a bowl of broth, a visit from a neighbour, a few encouraging words. Such things cannot cure every illness. Yet they matter. They always matter. As the firelight flickers across timber walls, you realise that health during the Little Ice Age depends upon far more than medicine alone. It depends upon food, shelter, warmth, knowledge, family, and luck. Some people recover, others do not. Winter shows little favouritism, still. Each evening, families continue tending one another as best they can, pushing back against cold, weakness, and uncertainty with whatever resources they possess, determined to endure another season in a world where survival often rests upon the strength of both body and community. The village slowly disappears behind you as another winter morning unfolds. The sky's clear for once. Sunlight reflects brilliantly from the snow, making the countryside almost painfully bright. Frozen fields stretch toward the horizon. Smoke rises from distant homes. Everything looks peaceful. Yet beneath that peaceful surface lies a tension that becomes easier to notice the longer you remain in this world. Not everyone experiences the Little Ice Age in the same way. The cold touches every level of society. Its consequences do not. Today your path leads toward a manor estate, where the relationship between peasants and lords becomes visible in ways both obvious and subtle. The manor house stands on slightly higher ground than the surrounding village. It is larger, sturdier, and more comfortable than the cottages clustered nearby. Though winter affects everyone, resources offer protection. Protection has value, especially during difficult years. You walk through the estate grounds as workers begin their daily tasks. Servants move between buildings. Stable hands care for horses. Administrators review records. The machinery of medieval society continues operating despite snow and frost. One enduring feature of feudal life was that peasants often owed rents, labour services, taxes, or other obligations to landowners. These expectations generally remained in place even when harvests were disappointing. As a result, environmental hardship could intensify existing social pressures. The challenge becomes immediately apparent. Imagine harvesting less grain than usual. Now imagine still owing obligations based on expectations formed during better years. That arithmetic rarely feels generous. You enter a storage building where estate officials inspect supplies. Their attention focuses on numbers. How much grain remains? How much can be distributed? How much must be reserved? The calculations resemble those performed in peasant households, only on a larger scale. Everyone worries about resources. The difference lies in how many resources each person begins with. Outside. Several villagers wait to discuss rents and obligations. Their expressions reveal concern. Nobody enjoys difficult conversations about food during cold winter. The steward overseeing these matters does not appear particularly cheerful either. Responsibility moves in multiple directions. Landowners must maintain estates. Peasants must support families. The climate complicates everything. A lesser-known historical detail comes from records showing that some medieval landlords occasionally reduced or delayed obligations during severe crises, while others enforced them strictly. Responses varied enormously according to local circumstances and individual personalities. Human behavior refuses to fit neatly into categories. Some people show flexibility, others do not. That reality has changed very little over the centuries. You walk across snow-covered fields surrounding the manor. The landscape tells its own story. These fields generate wealth. When harvests succeed, prosperity follows. When harvests disappoint, tensions rise. The connection is direct. The Little Ice Age places additional strain on agricultural systems already vulnerable to weather fluctuations. Cooler summers, excessive rainfall in some regions, and shortened growing seasons can all affect productivity. Not every year becomes disastrous. Many years remain manageable. The problem is uncertainty. Uncertainty accumulates. One poor harvest may be survivable. Several difficult seasons in close succession create larger problems. You speak with a tenant farmer repairing a fence. His hands move steadily despite the cold. He explains that planning has become more complicated than it once seemed. Nobody can predict exactly what the coming seasons will bring. Every decision involves risk, planting choices, livestock management, food storage. Nothing feels guaranteed. Researchers continue discussing how much climatic cooling contributed to broader social changes across medieval and early modern Europe. Economic structures, political conflicts, demographic shifts, and environmental conditions all interacted in complicated ways. History rarely follows a single cause. Instead, many forces overlap. The cold weather becomes one thread within a much larger tapestry. By midday, you enter the manor hall. The contrast with ordinary cottages is impossible to miss. The room is larger. The furnishings are finer. The food is more varied. Winter remains present, but its effects feel somewhat softened. Resources create buffers, not complete immunity, just buffers. A noble family may still face reduced income after poor harvests. They are simply less likely to skip meals because of it. The distinction matters. You watch servants carry firewood toward large hearths. The flames burn brightly. Elsewhere, villagers carefully count every remaining log. The difference feels striking. A curious anecdote preserved in some historical records involves disputes over hunting rights during difficult periods. When food became scarce, tensions sometimes emerged between those legally allowed to hunt and those simply trying to feed their families. Such conflicts reveal how environmental pressure could expose underlying social divisions. Hunger tends to sharpen disagreements. The afternoon passes beneath a pale winter sun. You accompany an estate official inspecting farmland. The conversation revolves almost entirely around practical concerns: drainage, crop yields, labour availability, future planning. The climate influences every topic. Nobody uses the phrase Little Ice Age. Nobody understands long-term climate trends. Yet everyone recognises that weather matters deeply. As evening approaches, villagers begin returning home. Smoke rises from chimneys across the landscape. The manor house glows warmly in the fading light. Beyond it, smaller cottages gather around their own fires. two worlds connected by land, labour and obligation. Two worlds experiencing the same winter from different positions. The cold does not distinguish between noble and peasant. The consequences often do. Night settles gradually. The sky fills with stars. Frost forms once more along fences and rooftops. You pause at the edge of the estate and look back across the snowy fields. The entire system depends upon those fields. Food, income, stability, power, everything begins there. And when climate introduces uncertainty into agriculture, uncertainty spreads outward through every layer of society. The manor house, the village, the market, the monastery, all connected, all vulnerable. As darkness deepens across the frozen countryside, both lords and peasants prepare for another winter night. Their lives differ greatly, yet they share one unavoidable reality. Beyond the walls of every home, regardless of wealth or status, the cold waits patiently, reminding everyone that nature remains one of the most powerful forces shaping medieval life. Winter eventually loosens its grip, not all at once, not dramatically. The snow retreats in patches. Streams begin flowing more freely. Mud returns to roads with all the enthusiasm of an unwanted guest. The air softens slightly. People step outdoors and lift their faces toward the sun as though greeting an old friend. After months of cold, even modest warmth feels miraculous. Yet today your attention turns toward something equally important: celebration. Because despite hardship, uncertainty, and long winters, medieval communities did not spend every moment worrying. They laughed, they gathered, they celebrated, and during the Little Ice Age, those celebrations often carried even greater emotional importance. You arrive in a village preparing for a seasonal festival. The atmosphere feels different immediately. People move with unusual energy. Children run excitedly between cottages. Neighbours exchange greetings. The smell of baking bread drifts through the air. For a few precious days, practical concern steps slightly into the background. Not disappear, simply retreat. One well-documented aspect of medieval life is the central role played by religious and seasonal festivals. These events structured the calendar, marked important transitions throughout the year, and provided opportunities for social gathering within communities. The calendar itself feels alive. Each season carries traditions. Each tradition carries meaning. After enduring months of cold weather, the arrival of spring becomes more than a meteorological event. It becomes a reason for joy. You watch villagers decorating a communal space near the church. Nothing appears extravagant. Simple greenery, handmade decorations, a few colourful pieces of cloth, yet the effort matters. Ceremony transforms ordinary places into special places. That transformation has power. Nearby, musicians tune instruments. The sounds drift through the village. A flute, a drum, the gentle plucking of strings. The music feels cheerful without becoming overwhelming. Exactly what people need after a difficult winter. You notice something interesting. The same individuals who spent months discussing food shortages, firewood supplies, and harsh weather now smile more easily. Celebration does not erase hardship. It provides relief from it. A charming historical tidbit survives in descriptions of medieval festivals, where participants sometimes stage playful mock battles, performances, or humorous role reversals. Communities often incorporated entertainment into celebrations, creating moments of laughter amid otherwise demanding lives. Human beings seem remarkably determined to find reasons to laugh, even in difficult centuries, perhaps especially in difficult centuries. The afternoon unfolds beneath bright skies. Tables appear, food emerges, Children play games in open spaces no longer buried beneath deep snow. The entire village seems lighter, not because problems have vanished, because people need moments that remind them life consists of more than problems. You join a gathering near the church where neighbours share meals and stories. The food remains simple by modern standards: bread, cheese, stew, ale, perhaps some preserved foods remaining from winter stores. Yet shared food often tastes better than solitary food. Community improves flavour, at least emotionally. A recurring theme visible throughout medieval Europe is that festivals strengthened social bonds. In agricultural societies, cooperation mattered enormously. Seasonal celebrations reinforced connections that helped communities function throughout the year. The significance becomes easier to understand when you remember everything already discussed: cold winters, food storage, animal care, difficult travel. People survive these challenges together. Celebrations acknowledge that reality. You sit beneath a clear sky listening to conversations flow around you. Someone tells a funny story. Someone else exaggerates a hunting adventure. The details may become increasingly heroic with each retelling. Nobody seems concerned. Entertainment matters more than accuracy at the moment. One elderly villager claims to remember a winter so severe that birds froze while flying. You strongly suspect the story has improved over time. The audience enjoys it anyway. Researchers continue exploring how climate fluctuations may have influenced the timing, character, and significance of certain seasonal traditions. While customs evolved for many reasons, communities often adapted celebrations to local conditions and experiences. Adaptation appears here too, not only in farming, not only in architecture, in culture itself. The afternoon slowly transitions toward evening. Fires are lit. Music continues. The atmosphere grows warmer despite the cooling air. People gather closer together. Voices rise and fall. Laughter carries across the village. You realize how important these moments must have been during the Little Ice Age. The climate places constant pressure on daily life. Festivals offer release, a chance to breathe, a chance to remember that survival is not the only purpose of existence. One curious custom recorded in various regions involved seasonal processions intended to welcome spring or encourage agricultural prosperity. Different communities practiced different traditions, but many reflected hopes for favourable weather and successful harvests. Hope becomes ritual. Ritual becomes tradition. Tradition becomes memory. The cycle continues generation after generation. As darkness settles, stars appear overhead. The celebration continues beneath torchlight. The scene feels beautiful, simple, human. You watch children growing sleepy beside their parents. Musicians continue playing. Neighbours continue talking. For a few hours, worries about future harvests seem less urgent, not forgotten, just quieter. And sometimes quieter is enough. A thoughtful discussion among scholars examines whether periods of environmental stress may have increased the social importance of communal rituals and festivals. While motivations varied widely, shared celebrations clearly provided emotional benefits during challenging times. Standing here, the idea feels persuasive. You can see those benefits directly. People need connection. They need tradition. They need moments of joy. The night grows deeper. Gradually the gathering begins dispersing. Families return home. Fires burn lower. Music fades. The village settles once more into familiar rhythms. Yet something remains. A lingering sense of togetherness. A reminder that communities are strengthened not only through labour and hardship, but also through celebration. You walk through the quiet streets beneath a sky full of stars. The cold has not vanished from the world. Future winters will come. Difficult seasons will return. Everyone knows this. Still, tonight has offered something valuable, a pause, a gathering, a reason to smile. And as the last festival fires glow softly against the darkness, you understand why such traditions endured for centuries. In a colder world, warmth comes not only from hearths and blankets, but also from the simple act of people coming together to celebrate the turning of the seasons. The final echoes of music fade into memory. Festival decorations gradually disappear. Villagers return to ordinary routines. Fields demand attention once more. Livestock require care. Repairs need completing. Life moves forward. Yet the celebration has left you thinking about something deeper. How do people explain a world that seems colder, stranger, and less predictable than the one their ancestors described? The answer lies not only in fields or markets, it lies in belief. You travel through a landscape where faith shapes daily life as completely as weather does. Church towers rise above villages, monasteries preserve knowledge, religious festivals structure the calendar, prayers accompany both triumph and hardship, and when unusual weather arrives, people naturally search for meaning. You walk along a country road beneath gathering clouds. Farmers working nearby glance toward the sky, not simply to predict rain, to interpret it. In medieval Europe, weather was often understood through spiritual frameworks. Storms, droughts, floods, and severe winters could be viewed as signs, warnings, tests, or expressions of divine will. Such interpretations existed alongside practical observations rather than replacing them entirely. People watched the sky carefully. They simply explained what they saw differently from modern meteorologists. You reach a small village where conversations revolve around an unusually cold spring. The older residents cannot remember another quite like it. Seeds remain unplanted longer than expected. Fruit trees bloom late. The season feels hesitant. That hesitation creates concern. When nature behaves unexpectedly, human imagination becomes active. One villager believes the weather reflects divine displeasure. Another blames a recent comet. Someone else points toward moral decline among neighbouring communities. Everyone has a theory. Very few involve atmospheric circulation patterns. You cannot entirely blame them. They are working with the information available. A particularly intriguing aspect of medieval culture involves the widespread circulation of local legends connected to weather. Certain mountains, forests, lakes, and ruins acquired reputations for influencing storms or harbouring supernatural forces associated with unusual climate events. Every region seems to have its stories: a haunted hill, a mysterious cave, a lake that supposedly predicts bad weather. The details vary. The impulse remains the same. People seek explanations. You arrive at a church where villagers have gathered for a special service. The atmosphere is serious but calm. Candles flicker. Voices echo softly against stone walls. Outside, cold rain taps against the windows. Inside, people pray for favourable weather and successful harvests. The scene feels deeply human. Across history, uncertainty often drives people toward rituals that provide comfort and structure. Weather during the Little Ice Age supplied uncertainty in abundance. You notice something important. Faith offers more than explanations. It offers community, hope, meaning. Even when conditions remain difficult, those qualities carry real value. The afternoon passes beneath dark skies. Rain alternates with bursts of wind. You take shelter inside a cottage where several neighbours discuss old stories passed down through generations. One tale involves a wandering spirit associated with winter storms. Another concerns strange lights seen before severe weather. A third describes a frozen river that supposedly concealed something ancient beneath the ice. The stories are fascinating, not because they are necessarily true, because they reveal how people think. A remarkable historical observation is that folklore often preserved memories of genuine environmental events. Stories might exaggerate details, alter timelines, or add supernatural elements, yet they sometimes originated from real floods, storms, or unusually harsh winters experienced by earlier generations. Memory and myth frequently travel together. Separating them is not always easy. Even for modern historians, you sit beside the fire listening as the stories continue. The room smells of wood smoke and damp clothing. Rain rattles softly against the roof. Outside, the weather feels unpredictable. Inside, narrative creates order. Each story transforms uncertainty into something understandable. Perhaps that is one reason stories endure. Researchers continue investigating how climate influenced folklore, religious practices, and cultural beliefs across different regions of Europe. The relationship remains complex because traditions developed from many influences simultaneously. Still, it seems unlikely that centuries of unusual weather left no mark upon collective imagination. The evidence suggests otherwise. By evening, the rain finally stops. Clouds begin breaking apart. A faint glow appears along the western horizon. Villagers emerge from homes and study the sky. Some seem relieved, others remain cautious. Experience has taught them that weather can change quickly. You walk toward the edge of the settlement where a small shrine stands beside a road. Flowers surround it. Offerings rest nearby. Travellers pause briefly before continuing onward. The gesture appears simple, almost routine, yet it reflects a larger truth. People seek reassurance whenever possible, particularly when facing forces beyond their control. One unusual belief recorded in certain areas held that church bells could help disperse storms. During threatening weather, bells sometimes rang across the countryside in hopes of protecting crops and communities. Whether the practice influenced the atmosphere remains doubtful. Whether it comforted people seems much more likely, and comfort should never be underestimated, especially in difficult times. Night arrives slowly. The clouds continue clearing. Stars emerge one by one. The village grows quiet. You stand beneath the open sky reflecting on everything you have witnessed. Cold winters, poor harvests, food shortages, adaptation, celebration, now belief, all interconnected. The Little Ice Age changes more than temperatures. It influences the stories people tell, the fears they hold, the hopes they nurture, the explanations they construct. As darkness deepens, church bells ring gently in the distance. Their sound drifts across fields and forests beneath a sky that finally appears calm. Tomorrow may bring sunshine, or frost, or rain. Nobody knows. That uncertainty remains one of the defining features of this world. Yet through faith, folklore, and shared traditions, people find ways to navigate it. And as the final bell fades into the night air, you realize that understanding the Little Ice Age means understanding not only how people survived colder weather, but also how they made sense of it within the stories they carried from one generation to the next. The countryside gradually gives way to stone walls, crowded streets, and the constant murmur of thousands of voices. You have arrived in a medieval city. If villages feel closely connected to fields and seasons, cities create a different experience entirely. The weather still matters, the climate still matters, the Little Ice Age still matters, but the effects appear through different lenses. Population, commerce, sanitation, crowding. You pass through a city gate shortly after sunrise. The streets beyond are already active. Merchants arrange goods. Labourers transport supplies. Apprentices hurry toward workshops. Bells echo from churches scattered across the urban landscape. The city feels alive, and also surprisingly cold. Stone buildings line narrow streets that receive limited sunlight during winter months. Moisture lingers, shadows persist, wind slips through alleys with unsettling efficiency. You pull your cloak tighter. Many residents are doing exactly the same thing. One important historical reality is that medieval cities often face significant challenges related to sanitation, crowding, and infrastructure. During periods of environmental stress, these existing difficulties could become even more pronounced. The city does not grow food. It depends upon food arriving from elsewhere. That dependence creates vulnerability. You walk through a marketplace where traders discuss grain shipments from surrounding regions. The conversations sound familiar. Harvests, prices, road conditions, weather. The topics follow you everywhere. The difference is scale. A village worries about feeding dozens of people. A city worries about feeding thousands. The mathematics become much more intimidating. You notice long lines forming near certain food vendors. Nothing dramatic. Nothing chaotic. Simply evidence that food distribution remains a matter of constant attention. When harvests are strong, cities thrive. When harvests disappoint, urban life becomes more complicated, very quickly. The smell of the city shifts constantly as you walk. Fresh bread from one street, smoke from another, animals, leather workshops, cooking fires, human activity compressed into limited space. Some aromas are pleasant, others are memorable in less flattering ways. The Little Ice Age does not improve urban odours. You pass a narrow alley where snow remains trapped between buildings despite several days of milder weather. The sunlight struggles to reach the ground. Ice clings stubbornly to shaded corners. Water freezes overnight and melts partially during the day. The result is a landscape determined to challenge anyone attempting graceful movement. Several pedestrians demonstrate this reality vividly. A curious historical detail involves the use of wooden pattens, elevated overshoes worn in some places to keep feet above mud, slush, and dirty streets. Medieval cities often presented practical challenges that demanded practical solutions. Fashion and survival occasionally cooperated. Occasionally, you continue toward a district filled with workshops. Blacksmiths hammer metal, carpenters shape wood, weavers process cloth. The sounds create a constant background rhythm. Work never entirely stops. Winter may slow certain activities, but cities possess enough economic diversity to keep many occupations active year-round. That diversity provides advantages. One crop failure does not instantly eliminate every source of income. Yet cities face problems villages do not. Crowding, dependency on external food supplies, complex logistics. Everything comes with trade-offs. Researchers continue examining how different urban centres adapted to climatic cooling across Europe. Some cities expanded despite environmental challenges, while others struggled with economic and demographic pressures. Local conditions often shaped outcomes more than broad continental trends. The story remains complicated. History usually is. By midday, snow begins falling unexpectedly. Not heavily, just enough to whiten rooftops and cloak streets in a thin layer of white. The city changes character almost immediately. The noise softens. The pace slows. The stone buildings seem older somehow, more solemn. You stop beside a public fountain where water flows sluggishly in the cold. Several residents fill containers despite the weather. Life continues. It always continues, even during unpleasant conditions. One remarkable observation from urban records involves the extent to which city authorities monitored supplies during difficult periods. Officials often worried about food availability, pricing, and public order. Maintaining stability required careful attention to practical realities. People become restless when food grows scarce. Authorities understand this very well. You enter a tavern seeking warmth. Inside, the atmosphere feels crowded but welcoming. Workers gather around tables. Travellers exchange news. Merchants discuss business. The fire burns brightly. The contrast with the snowy streets outside feels dramatic. You listen to conversations unfolding around the room. Several people complain about winter. This should not surprise you. Complaining about weather may be one of humanity's oldest traditions. The centuries have done little to change it. One man insists the current winter is the worst in memory. An older customer immediately claims to remember one twice as bad. The debate continues enthusiastically. No clear winner emerges. The afternoon drifts toward evening. Candles appear in windows. Shopkeepers close doors. The snowfall gradually ends. You climb a staircase leading to a higher part of the city and look across the rooftops. The view is extraordinary. Thousands of chimneys release smoke into the cold air. Church towers rise above crowded buildings. Narrow streets wind through the urban maze. From here, the city appears almost peaceful. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance lies an intricate system balancing food, fuel, labour, commerce, and survival. The Little Ice Age places pressure upon every part of that system, sometimes gently, sometimes severely, always persistently. Night arrives, lanterns glow, voices echo through dark streets. The city remains awake longer than any village you have visited. Urban life possesses its own rhythm, its own challenges, its own resilience. You stand watching snow melt slowly from stone rooftops and realize that cities represent another form of adaptation. Thousands of people living together, sharing resources, exchanging goods, and navigating environmental uncertainty collectively. The cold remains present, the risks remain present, but so does human ingenuity. And beneath the winter sky of medieval Europe, the city continues breathing, working, and enduring, one crowded street at a time. The city fades behind you. Stone walls shrink into the distance. Roads become narrower. Fields return. Forests reappear along the horizon. As you travel across the countryside, people speak about weather in a different tone now. Not ordinary weather, not another cold winter. Something bigger, something memorable. The kind of event that remains in conversation for decades. The kind grandparents describe to grandchildren long after it has passed. Today, you encounter the most dramatic face of the Little Ice Age. Extreme weather. You arrive in a valley where villagers still tell stories about a winter that transformed the landscape. The details vary slightly depending on who tells the story. The emotional impact does not. Snow-buried fences, roads vanished. Travel stopped. Livestock struggled. Entire communities found themselves isolated for weeks. Whether every detail survives accurately is impossible to know. What matters is that the event left a deep impression. Certain winters during the Little Ice Age were indeed exceptionally severe in parts of Europe. Historical documents describe frozen rivers, prolonged cold spells, and weather conditions that disrupted normal life on a remarkable scale. You stand beside a river that now flows peacefully. Years earlier, according to local accounts, the entire waterway froze solid. People crossed where boats normally travelled. Children played where fish usually swam. The familiar landscape became something entirely different. Climate has a strange ability to reshape the ordinary. Places people know intimately can suddenly appear unfamiliar. You continue walking through the valley. Older villagers point toward distant hills. Glaciers. The word carries weight. In certain mountainous regions, glaciers advance during colder centuries, sometimes threatening farmland, roads, and settlements. Communities living near these frozen masses watch them move gradually forward across generations. Imagine witnessing a mountain of ice slowly approaching over the course of your lifetime, not racing, not charging, simply advancing with relentless patience. That image stays with people. A remarkable historical observation comes from Alpine communities that held religious processions and ceremonies in response to advancing glaciers. To many observers, the ice seemed almost alive, steadily consuming land and altering familiar surroundings. You cannot entirely blame them for feeling unsettled. A moving glacier is difficult to ignore. The afternoon sky darkens unexpectedly. Clouds gather with alarming speed. Villagers glance upward. Old habits, experience has taught caution. Weather can change quickly, particularly in an era already known for climatic instability. Soon wind sweeps across the landscape. Tree branches bend. Loose snow swirls through the air. The atmosphere transforms within minutes. You find shelter inside a farmhouse as the storm develops. The family seems concerned but not surprised. Storms happen. Preparation exists for exactly this reason. Inside, the mood remains calm. Outside, the weather grows increasingly dramatic. Wind rattles shutters. Snow strikes walls. The house creaks softly. The contrast feels almost theatrical. A small island of warmth surrounded by chaos. Some researchers continue investigating the extent to which clusters of volcanic eruptions may have contributed to periods of unusual cooling during parts of the Little Ice Age. The interaction between volcanic activity, atmospheric conditions, and climate remains an area of ongoing study. The villagers, of course, possess no knowledge of distant volcanic systems. They simply experience the results. Cold, storms, unpredictable seasons. That is the reality available to them. Hours pass. The storm eventually weakens. You step outside once more. The landscape has changed. Again, fresh snow covers tracks. Drifts form along fences. The world appears newly created. One particularly curious story survives from various regions of Europe concerning so-called frost fairs held on frozen rivers during exceptionally cold winters. Markets, games, and social gatherings sometimes appeared on ice thick enough to support large crowds. What would normally be a transportation route became a temporary public square. Human beings remain astonishingly adaptable. Presented with a frozen river, they eventually decide to hold a festival on it. The logic is strangely admirable. You continue your journey toward higher ground. The view from a nearby ridge reveals the full scale of the countryside. Forests, villages, fields, roads, all connected, all exposed to the same environmental forces. Extreme weather rarely respects boundaries. A storm crossing one valley may affect dozens of communities. A severe winter may reshape an entire region's experience. This interconnectedness becomes increasingly apparent. The Little Ice Age is not simply a collection of cold days. It is a long period during which unusual weather repeatedly influences human lives, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. As evening approaches, the storm clouds finally disperse. The setting sun breaks through. Golden light spreads across fresh snow. The scene becomes breathtaking, beautiful enough to make you forget the difficulties for a moment. Nature often works that way. The same forces that create hardship can also create extraordinary beauty. You stand quietly watching sunlight illuminate distant hills. The world glows, ice sparkles, the air feels perfectly still. Yet beneath that beauty lies a reminder. This landscape has tested generations. Failed harvests, severe winters, advancing glaciers, unexpected storms. The memories remain embedded in local stories and collective experience. As darkness settles, lights begin appearing in scattered villages across the valley. tiny points of warmth surrounded by a vast winter landscape. The image feels familiar now. You've seen it many times throughout this journey. Communities enduring, adapting, persisting. The extreme weather events of the Little Ice Age may have been frightening, disruptive, and sometimes devastating. Yet they also revealed something else. The remarkable capacity of ordinary people to continue living, working, and finding meaning even when nature displayed its most formidable power. The stars emerge overhead. The snow reflects their light, and across the silent countryside, people prepare for another night beneath a climate capable of producing both wonder and hardship in equal measure. The valley remains quiet after the storm. Snow still blankets the ground, though the season is beginning to shift once again. Small signs of change appear everywhere. Water drips from rooftops during the warmest hours of the day. Patches of earth emerge along south-facing slopes. Birds return cautiously. Nature is moving forward, and so are the people. One of the most fascinating aspects of life during the Little Ice Age is that communities did not simply endure hardship. They learned from it. They adapted. They experimented. They improved. You travel through a farming district where generations have accumulated practical knowledge about surviving colder conditions. Nothing here resembles a grand scientific revolution. The changes are quieter than that. A different planting method, a new storage technique, a more effective design for clothing, small adjustments repeated thousands of times. The result is resilience. You arrive at a farm where workers are preparing fields for the coming season. The ground remains cold, but planning has already begun. One farmer explains how his family changed crop choices after several disappointing harvests decades earlier. Certain grains proved more dependable. Certain methods reduced risk. Experience became instruction. Instruction became tradition. A recurring historical pattern across Europe involved farmers adapting agricultural practices to local environmental conditions. Communities experimented with crop selection, planting schedules, drainage systems, and land management strategies in efforts to improve productivity despite changing weather patterns. Necessity encourages creativity, perhaps not instantly, but eventually. You walk beside a field where drainage channels direct excess water away from cultivated land. The system appears simple. That simplicity is part of its strength. Many successful innovations are not complicated. They simply solve real problems. Nearby, workers repair stone walls that help protect fields from wind. Again, nothing dramatic, just practical responses to practical challenges. A delightful historical curiosity involves the development and refinement of increasingly specialized winter clothing in many regions. People experimented with layering techniques, different fabrics, and improved garment designs long before anyone talked about outdoor performance gear. In a sense, medieval Europeans were conducting centuries of field testing. The results mattered. Nobody enjoys freezing. You continue toward a village known for textile production. The streets bustle with activity. Wool is everywhere. Bundles of raw fleece, spinning wheels, woven cloth, finished garments. The colder climate increases the value of warm clothing, creating opportunities for skilled craftsmen and traders. Climate influences economies in unexpected ways. Challenges for one group sometimes create opportunities for another. The village workshop you visit feels warm compared to the outdoors. Workers sit together, spinning thread while exchanging stories. Their hands move with impressive speed. Years of practice reveal themselves in every motion. One woman demonstrates how particular weaving techniques produce thicker, more insulating fabrics. The knowledge has been passed through generations. You realize that adaptation is not limited to agriculture. It touches every aspect of life: housing, clothing, Food preservation, transportation, everything evolves. Some scholars continue discussing the extent to which environmental pressures accelerated certain technological and organizational developments. While innovation emerges from many causes, difficult conditions often encourage people to seek new solutions. Standing here, that idea feels entirely reasonable. After all, discomfort can be an excellent motivator. You leave the workshop and travel toward a riverside settlement. The river itself provides another example of adaptation. Communities have adjusted transportation methods, storage practices, and seasonal routines based on years of experience with changing conditions. The process unfolds gradually. Nobody announces a grand strategy. People simply learn, then teach others, then improve further. One especially interesting detail survives in records describing ice houses and other cooling structures used to preserve food in some regions. Long before mechanical refrigeration, communities found creative ways to take advantage of natural cold conditions. The concept feels surprisingly modern. Store winter cold for future use. Simple, effective, clever. The afternoon sunlight grows stronger. Snow melts steadily from rooftops. Children splash through muddy pathways created by thawing ice. Not everyone appreciates the mud, yet compared to deep winter, most people seem willing to accept it. Spring always feels welcome after a difficult season. You stop beside a blacksmith's workshop where tools are being repaired and improved. The forge glows brightly. Metal rings against metal. Sparks leap into the air. Agricultural tools receive special attention. Better tools mean more efficient labour. More efficient labour means greater resilience. Every improvement matters. Researchers examining rural communities often emphasise the importance of accumulated local knowledge. People living through the Little Ice Age were not passive victims of climate. They constantly adjusted behaviours, practices, and expectations based on observation and experience. That distinction deserves emphasis. Adaptation is active, not passive. It requires effort, thought, patience. The evening approaches. Golden light spreads across fields where winter's grip is finally weakening. You pass several homes undergoing repairs, roofs strengthened, walls reinforced, storage spaces expanded. The work never truly ends, nor does learning. Each difficult season teaches lessons. Some lessons are painful, others prove valuable. Most become part of collective memory. One elderly farmer shares advice inherited from his grandfather. Another references a particularly severe winter decades earlier. A third explains why certain crops should never be planted in a specific low-lying field. The knowledge network extends across generations, informal, practical, effective. The sun sinks lower. Birdsong returns to the countryside. The world feels gentler than it did a few weeks earlier, yet traces of winter remain everywhere, and so do the lessons winter provided. You stand at the edge of a field watching villagers prepare for another agricultural season. The scene appears ordinary. Perhaps that is what makes it remarkable. These people have endured cold years, poor harvests, storms, and uncertainty. Yet they continue refining methods, sharing knowledge, and improving their chances, not through dramatic inventions, through countless small decisions. As twilight settles across the landscape, you realize that one of the most enduring legacies of the Little Ice Age may not be the cold itself. It may be the creativity and adaptability that cold inspired. Generation after generation, ordinary people responded to changing conditions with persistence, practicality, and ingenuity. And beneath the fading light of another spring evening, those quiet innovations continue shaping life across medieval Europe. Spring has finally arrived in earnest. The fields that only weeks ago lay frozen beneath snow now shimmer with fresh green growth. Streams rush with meltwater. Birds fill the air with sound. Villagers seem to breathe easier, at least for the moment. Because today you begin noticing something that climate alone cannot explain. The differences between communities. Some villages appear healthy and organised. Others seem strained. Some neighbours cooperate closely. Others argue. Some regions endure hardship remarkably well. Others struggle. The weather may be shared. The response is not. You walk through a farming settlement preparing for the coming harvest season. The atmosphere feels productive. People exchange tools. Families help one another repair fences. Workers join together to clear irrigation channels blocked during winter. The cooperation appears almost routine. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just practical assistance. One of the enduring realities of medieval rural life is that many agricultural tasks depended heavily upon collective labour. Harvesting, construction projects, maintenance work, and emergency responses often required cooperation beyond the immediate household. Community was not merely a pleasant idea, it was a survival strategy. You watch several families working together to rebuild a small bridge damaged during winter floods. Nobody receives special recognition. Nobody expects applause. The bridge benefits everyone, therefore everyone contributes. The logic feels refreshingly straightforward. As the morning progresses, you speak with villagers who remember difficult years when cooperation became especially important. Shared food, shared labour, shared shelter, shared information. The stories reveal a simple truth. Hardship can bring people together. It can also pull them apart. The outcome depends upon circumstances and human choices. You continue toward another settlement several miles away. The atmosphere changes noticeably. The people here seem more tense. Conversations are shorter. Expressions are more guarded. Recent harvest failures have created strain. Resources remain limited. Trust appears fragile. The contrast is striking. A fascinating historical detail appears in records from various regions where villages created communal grain reserves or emergency stores intended to help members during difficult years. Such systems varied widely in effectiveness, but they reveal deliberate efforts to reduce collective vulnerability. The idea feels sensible. Store a little during good years. Use it during bad years. Simple in theory. More complicated in practice. Human beings have always possessed strong opinions about shared resources. You stop beside a well where several residents discuss recent disagreements involving grazing rights. The argument itself seems minor, yet beneath it lies something larger. Scarcity magnifies tensions. When resources feel abundant, compromise comes more easily. When resources feel limited, every decision carries greater weight. Climate does not create every conflict. It can certainly intensify existing ones. You continue walking through the village. The evidence appears subtle but unmistakable. Poorly maintained buildings, signs of economic strain, people worrying about future harvests. Nothing catastrophic, just pressure. Pressure that accumulates over time. Many historians emphasize that environmental challenges often interacted with social and economic conditions already present within communities. Weather alone rarely determined outcomes. Human relationships, institutions, and local resources played important roles as well. Two villages experiencing similar weather might experience very different results. The difference often lies in organization, leadership, cooperation, luck, sometimes all three. By midday, you arrive at a small gathering where neighboring communities meet to discuss shared concerns, road maintenance, water management, land boundaries, agricultural planning. The conversation remains practical. People understand they face common challenges. Working together often makes sense, not always, but often. One particularly interesting custom from certain regions involved collective work days, where community members gathered to complete large tasks benefiting everyone. repairing roads, maintaining flood defences, or improving shared infrastructure became social events as well as practical necessities. Work and community blended together. The distinction between the two was often less rigid than modern people might expect. The afternoon sun shines warmly. Children play nearby while adults continue discussions. The scene feels optimistic, yet not every story carries such optimism. An elderly man tells you about a winter decades earlier when resources became scarce enough to strain relationships throughout the area. Arguments increased, trust declined. People focused more narrowly on immediate survival. His memory remains vivid, not because of the weather itself, because of what it revealed about human nature. That observation lingers with you. Environmental stress acts like a mirror. It often reveals qualities already present beneath the surface: generosity, patience, selfishness, resilience, fear, all become easier to see. Researchers continue examining how communities responded differently to environmental pressures across Europe. Some developed cooperative systems that improved resilience. Others struggled with fragmentation, inequality, or conflict. The diversity of outcomes remains one of the most interesting aspects of the period. There was no single medieval experience, only countless local experiences, each shaped by unique circumstances. As evening approaches, villagers gather for a shared meal outdoors. The atmosphere feels warm and relaxed. Food passes from hand to hand. Stories circulate. Laughter appears frequently. You notice how many relationships support daily life: family, neighbours, friends, work partners, religious communities. These networks matter, perhaps more than any stored resource, because resources eventually run out. Relationships can generate new resources: labour, knowledge, support, hope. The sun begins sinking toward the horizon. Golden light spreads across fields preparing for another growing season. The people around you know future difficulties will come. More cold winters, more uncertain harvests, more challenges. Yet they also know something else. No one faces those challenges entirely alone, at least not here. The meal continues. Voices mingle softly in the evening air, and as darkness slowly settles across the countryside, you realise that one of the most important defences against the hardships of the Little Ice Age was not a tool, a building, or a crop. It was the ability of ordinary people to work together when circumstances demanded it. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they failed. But the effort itself became part of the story of how medieval Europe endured a colder world. Years pass, then decades, then generations. The children you watch throwing snowballs beside frozen ponds have become parents. The farmers carefully studying uncertain skies have grown old. New families occupy familiar cottages. New voices fill village streets. Yet one thing remains remarkably consistent. The climate people once considered unusual has gradually become normal. You stand on a hillside overlooking fields that stretch toward the horizon. The landscape appears peaceful beneath a mild summer sky. Farmers work steadily below. Livestock graze. Smoke rises from scattered homes. Life continues. That simple phrase has accompanied your journey from the beginning. Now it takes on deeper meaning. Because the Little Ice Age is no longer merely an interruption. It has become part of the world people know. One of the most significant aspects of long-term environmental change is that human expectations adapt. What one generation experiences as unusual, the next generation may regard as ordinary. Memories fade, new baselines emerge, life adjusts around them. The process happens so slowly that many people barely notice. You walk down toward a village where daily routines unfold with familiar confidence. Children learn agricultural practices suited to local conditions. Families build homes according to lessons accumulated over generations. Communities organise food storage around expectations shaped by experience. Adaptation has become culture. No one holds a meeting announcing the transformation. It simply happens, one season at a time. You pass a farmer teaching his son when to plant certain crops. The advice sounds practical. Plant later if the spring remains cold. Watch the low fields carefully. Prepare for sudden weather changes. The instructions reflect generations of observation. Knowledge once learned through hardship now passes naturally between family members. This transfer of experience may be one of the most powerful tools humans possess. A charming historical detail survives in agricultural almanacs and local sayings that attempted to predict weather patterns through observations of plants, animals, and seasonal changes. Some proved surprisingly useful. Others were probably no more reliable than hopeful guessing. Human beings have always enjoyed believing they can outsmart the weather. The weather often disagrees. You continue along a path bordered by flowering plants. The season feels pleasant, yet conversations still reveal awareness of climatic uncertainty. A late frost remains possible. Heavy rains remain possible. An unusually cold winter remains possible. People do not forget such lessons easily. They simply incorporate them into daily expectations. You stop beside a group of elders resting beneath a tree. Their stories reveal how collective memory functions. One remembers a severe winter from childhood. Another recalls flooding after an unusually cold season. A third speaks of harvest failures decades earlier. The details differ. The themes remain familiar. Nature can be generous. Nature can be harsh. Preparation matters. Patience matters. Community matters. These lessons endure. Many historians emphasize that societies often adapt more effectively to gradual environmental change than to sudden shocks. The slow pace of the Little Ice Age allowed communities time to develop responses, even though those responses were not always sufficient or evenly distributed. The adaptation process was imperfect, yet it was real. You notice evidence everywhere: improved storage methods, refined farming practices, regional trade networks, construction techniques, cultural traditions. The climate helped shape them all, not alone, but significantly. The afternoon drifts onward. Clouds move lazily across the sky. You arrive at a market town where prosperity appears modest but stable. Merchants trade goods. Craftsmen work in open doorways. Children run through narrow streets. Nothing about the scene suggests a civilization overwhelmed by climate. Instead, it suggests something else: adjustment. Humans possess a remarkable ability to normalize conditions once considered extraordinary. Researchers continue exploring how perceptions of climate changed over time during colder centuries. Determining exactly what people considered normal at different moments remains challenging. But surviving records indicate that expectations evolved alongside lived experience. People adapt mentally as well as physically. That adaptation may be just as important. You pause beside a bridge crossing a river. The water moves calmly beneath. Several villagers mention winters when the river froze more extensively than it does today. The younger generation listens with interest. Some seem skeptical, others fascinated. Every generation inherits stories from the one before. Not all stories feel equally relevant, at least until a particularly cold winter arrives. Then old memories suddenly seem useful again. One curious anecdote from historical records involves communities preserving memories of unusual weather through songs, poems, and local traditions. Long after specific events ended, cultural expressions helped keep them alive. Memory takes many forms, not all of them written. As evening approaches, you climb a hill overlooking the surrounding countryside. The view feels familiar: fields, villages, roads, forests. You've seen landscapes like this throughout your journey, yet now they appear different. Not because the land changed, because your understanding changed. You can see the accumulated influence of centuries, the cold winters, the agricultural adjustments, the community responses, the cultural adaptations, the innovations to the traditions, everything layered together. The Little Ice Age did not merely happen to people. People responded to it, continuously, generation after generation. The sun sinks lower. Golden light spreads across fields where farmers finish the day's work. The scene appears ordinary. And that may be the most remarkable thing of all. What once felt unusual has become routine. What once seemed threatening has become familiar. Not because the challenges disappeared, because people learned how to live with them. The evening air cools gently. Village bells ring in the distance. Smoke rises from countless chimneys. Families gather for supper. Children listen to stories. Farmers discuss tomorrow's tasks. Life moves forward exactly as it always has. And standing above the landscape, watching another day fade into twilight, you realize that one of humanity's greatest strengths is not the ability to control nature. It is the ability to adapt to nature, slowly and persistently, until even a colder world begins to feel like home. The sun rises gently over the countryside. Morning mist drifts across fields. Birds move through hedgerows. Smoke curls upward from village chimneys exactly as it has throughout your journey. The scene feels familiar now, comfortably familiar. You have walked frozen roads, crossed icy rivers, sheltered beside smoky hearths, listened to farmers discuss uncertain harvests, watched children play in the snow, and stood beneath skies that seemed determined to challenge everyone living beneath them. Now, as your journey through the Little Ice Age draws toward its end, you begin to see the larger picture. Not a story about weather alone, a story about people. You climb a hill overlooking the landscape. Villages dot the countryside. Fields spread outward in every direction. Roads connect communities across valleys and forests. The view appears peaceful, yet every part of it carries traces of adaptation. A broadly accepted conclusion among historians is that the Little Ice Age influenced agriculture, settlement patterns, economic activity, and everyday life across many parts of Europe. Its effects varied widely from region to region, but few areas remained entirely untouched by changing climatic conditions. The influence lingers everywhere, in farming methods, in architecture, in traditions, in local memory. The climate helped shape the world below, not alone, but significantly. You stand quietly and reflect on the generations who lived through these centuries. Most never realized they were part of a historical period that future scholars would name and study. They were simply living, working, raising families, repairing roofs, storing grain, preparing for winter, the ordinary tasks of existence. History often remembers kings, battles, and grand events. Yet the true story of the Little Ice Age belongs largely to ordinary people. Farmers watching the sky, mothers stretching food supply, and children learning seasonal routines, monks recording unusual weather, craftsmen improving tools, neighbours helping one another through difficult winters. Their lives formed the foundation. One intriguing observation from historical research is that some local traditions and seasonal customs developed during colder centuries continued long after climatic conditions began changing again. Human habits often outlast the circumstances that created them. Culture remembers. Sometimes without realizing it, you begin walking down the hillside. The path winds between fields filled with summer growth. The warmth of the season makes it easy to forget the harsh winters you witnessed earlier. Easy, but not entirely possible, because the memory remains, just as it remained for the people who lived here. You pass a farmhouse where several generations share a meal outdoors. The site reminds you of a recurring theme throughout this journey: continuity. People arrive, people leave, generations rise and fall, life continues. The climate changes slowly, societies adapt slowly. The process unfolds across centuries rather than years. That long perspective can be difficult to grasp. Human lives are short. Climate history is not. Researchers continue debating the precise timing, causes, and regional impacts of different phases of the Little Ice Age. The picture remains complex because Europe itself is complex. Mountains, coastlines, forests, rivers, and local weather systems created enormous variation. There was never one single Little Ice Age experience. There were countless experiences. Some communities faced severe hardship. Others adapted more successfully. Many encountered both at different times. The diversity matters. History rarely provides universal stories. As afternoon approaches, you arrive at a small village preparing for harvest. The atmosphere feels hopeful, fields appear healthy, children help with preparations, neighbours exchange greetings. The future remains uncertain, as it always does. But people continue planning for it. That willingness to plan may be one of humanity's most remarkable qualities. Even after difficult winters, even after failed harvests, even after storms and setbacks, people continue investing effort in tomorrow. A small but fascinating historical note survives in records showing how carefully some communities tracked seasonal changes across generations. Planting dates, harvest dates, and weather observation sometimes became part of local knowledge passed from parents to children. Without intending it, these communities created environmental histories, tiny pieces of memory preserved through everyday life. The afternoon slowly softens into evening. Golden sunlight spreads across fields. The village becomes quieter. Workers return home. Animals settle into barns. Smoke rises from chimneys. You recognize nearly every detail now. The smell of wood fires, the sound of distant bells, the sight of people gathering at the end of the day. The rhythm has become familiar, just as it became familiar to the generations who lived through the Little Ice Age itself. And now, as the light begins fading, it is time to slow the pace, to let the landscape settle, to allow the journey to come gently to rest. The fields grow quieter beneath the evening sky, the roads empty, the birds gradually fall silent. A cool breeze moves through the grass and then passes on. You stand once more upon a hillside overlooking the world you have spent so much time exploring. Below you lie villages filled with warm fires, families sharing meals, children drifting towards sleep, farmers preparing for tomorrow. The centuries seem to blur together, winter and summer, hardship and celebration, cold mornings and warm evenings, all woven into a single long story. The Little Ice Age was never only about colder temperatures. It was about adaptation, patience, community, memory, the quiet determination of ordinary people facing circumstances they could not control. As darkness settles softly across the landscape, lights begin appearing one by one in distant homes, small points of warmth scattered across the countryside, gentle, steady, reassuring. You watch them for a while. There's no need to hurry now. The roads are quiet. The fields are calm. The sky above is clear and filled with stars. Somewhere a church bell rings once, then silence returns. And in that silence, you can almost feel the centuries resting peacefully around you. The cold winters have passed. The harvests have come and gone. Generations have lived, loved, worked, and dreamed beneath these same skies. Now the countryside grows still. The stars shine softly overhead. The fires burn warmly below. And as the night deepens across medieval Europe, you let the final images drift gently into darkness. carried away on cool evening air, leaving only calm, quiet fields, distant lights, and the comforting knowledge that even through centuries of cold and uncertainty, life endured sweet dreams